Can I have a hug? Four simple words from a stranger that would shatter everything Daniel Brooks thought he knew about safety, grief, and the terrifying risk of letting someone new into his carefully guarded life. What started as one desperate embrace outside a cafe became the most dangerous kindness he'd ever offered, because the broken woman who asked for comfort would soon be accused of threatening his daughter, investigated by his dead wife's parents, and forced to disappear just when his little girl needed her most. This is the story of three people who had to choose between fear and belonging when the cost of both seemed unbearable. If you're drawn to stories about unexpected connections and the courage it takes to trust again, stay with me until the end. And if this story touches you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The autumn afternoon carried that particular quality of light that made everything feel both beautiful and melancholy. Golden sun filtering through trees that were just beginning to surrender their leaves, shadows growing longer as the day prepared to give way to evening. Daniel Brooks sat at a small metal table outside Sullivan's Cafe, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm while he'd been lost in thought. This was his ritual, his one stolen hour of peace every Saturday afternoon while his daughter attended her art class 3 blocks away. He came here not because the coffee was exceptional, it wasn't, but because nobody knew him. Nobody looked at him with those careful, pitying eyes that said, "We're so sorry about your wife." Nobody asked how he was holding up or offered unsolicited advice about single parenting. Here, he was just another face in the Saturday crowd, anonymous and unburdened by the weight of other people's sympathy. Daniel was 34 but felt older. Grief had a way of aging a person from the inside out, settling into the spaces where lightness used to live. His dark hair was already showing threads of silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened in the 18 months since Sarah died. He'd been told he was handsome once, back when he smiled easily and didn't carry the permanent tension of someone bracing for the next terrible thing. He took a sip of cold coffee and grimaced, debating whether it was worth going inside for a fresh cup. That's when he saw her. The young woman approached hesitantly, as if each step required conscious decision. She couldn't have been more than 25 or 26, with light brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and clothes that hung loosely on a too thin frame. But it was her eyes that caught him, hollow and haunted, carrying the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. She stopped a few feet from his table, and Daniel felt his body tense automatically. He'd lived in the city long enough to recognize desperation when he saw it, and this woman wore it like a second skin. His first instinct was to look away, to become suddenly fascinated by his phone, to make himself unavailable in the way urban dwellers learn to do. But something kept his gaze steady. "Excuse me," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper, rough, as if she hadn't used it much lately. "I know this is going to sound strange." Daniel's hand moved instinctively toward his wallet pocket. He had a 20 he could spare, though he'd have to skip lunch tomorrow to make up for it. Money was always tight, always a calculation of what could stretch and what couldn't. "I'm not asking for money," she said quickly, reading his movement. A flush of color touched her pale cheeks. She trailed off, and Daniel watched her hands twist together, fingers trembling. "I know this is crazy. You can say no. You should probably say no." "What do you need?" The question came out more gently than he'd intended. She met his eyes then, and what he saw there made his breath catch. It wasn't the look of someone working a con or running a scam. It was raw, naked vulnerability, the expression of someone who had run out of everything, including dignity, and was down to one last desperate act. "Can I have a hug?" The words landed between them like stones dropping into still water, sending ripples of awkwardness and confusion in all directions. Daniel's mind went blank, then immediately flooded with competing impulses. This is weird. This could be dangerous. She could be unstable. What if she's trying to rob me? What if someone sees and misunderstands? What if— "I'm sorry," she said quickly, already backing away. "That was stupid. I shouldn't have—" "Wait." The word came out before Daniel's rational mind could stop it. The woman froze, and he found himself standing, chair scraping against concrete. Are you okay?" It was possibly the most inadequate question he'd ever asked. Clearly, she was not okay. Clearly, something had brought her to the point of approaching a stranger with a request that violated every social norm about personal space and appropriate interaction. "No," she said simply, and her honesty was so stark it felt like a slap. "No, I'm really not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time." Her voice cracked. I just, I can't remember the last time someone touched me in a way that wasn't clinical or professional, or I can't remember the last time someone gave me a hug like I was a person worth caring about." Daniel's throat tightened. He understood that kind of loneliness more than he wanted to admit. Since Sarah died, physical affection had become limited to his daughter's spontaneous embraces and the occasional awkward pat on the shoulder from well-meaning friends. The loss of casual touch, of intimate connection, left a person feeling isolated in their own skin. "Okay," he heard himself say. Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Yeah." He stepped out from behind the table, hyper-aware of the other cafe patrons who might be watching, of how this would look to anyone passing by. "Really?" She moved toward him slowly, as if he might change his mind at any second. When she was close enough, Daniel opened his arms, and she stepped into them with the careful gratitude of someone accepting an undeserved gift. She was small against his chest, all sharp angles and barely their weight. Daniel wrapped his arms around her gently, feeling her entire body tremble, and then she was crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole frame. Her hands clutched at the back of his jacket, and he could feel her tears soaking through his shirt. "It's okay," he murmured, the same words he used when his daughter woke from nightmares. "It's okay. Just breathe. Just..." They must have stood there for 3 or 4 minutes, though it felt both longer and shorter. Daniel was intensely aware of everything. The way she smelled faintly of cheap soap and mint, the way her breath hitched between sobs, the curious glances from other cafe patrons, the sound of traffic on the street behind them. But mostly, he was aware of the profound sadness radiating from this stranger, a grief so deep it seemed to have weight and texture. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and wet, mascara smudged beneath her red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping roughly at her cheeks. "God, I'm so sorry. I got your shirt all..." "It's just a shirt." Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled but clean napkin, offering it to her. "Here." She took it gratefully, pressing it against her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea. Thank you." They stood there awkwardly, the moment of connection fading into uncertainty. Daniel knew he should have probably just let her walk away now, return to his cooling coffee and his stolen hour of anonymity. But the journalist part of his brain that had gone dormant since Sarah's death was suddenly whirring to life with questions. Who was this woman? What had brought her to this point? What kind of pain drove someone to ask a stranger for basic human comfort? "Do you want to sit?" The invitation surprised them both. She looked at the empty chair across from his table, then back at his face, searching for something, sincerity, maybe, or confirmation that he wasn't mocking her. "You don't have to do that." "I know." Daniel gestured to the chair. "Sit. I'm Daniel, by the way." "Lena." She lowered herself into the chair carefully, as if sudden movements might cause pain. Lena Hale. Up close and in better light, Daniel could see details he'd missed before. The dark circles under her eyes suggested chronic sleep deprivation. Her clothes, while clean, were worn and outdated, the kind of things people kept in their closet for years because replacing them wasn't a priority. There was a tension in her posture, a careful way she held herself that spoke of either injury or chronic pain. And when she moved her left hand to push hair behind her ear, he caught sight of a thick scar running along her forearm. "I should explain," Lena said, staring at her hands folded on the table. "So you don't think I'm completely insane? You don't owe me an explanation. I want to give you one anyway." She took a shaky breath. 2 years ago, I was in a car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light and hit me head on. I was in the hospital for 3 months, had 7 surgeries. They said I was lucky to survive. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. He knew about the particular cruelty of people calling you lucky when your entire life had been destroyed. "My fiancé couldn't handle it," Lena continued, her voice flat now, reciting facts rather than living them. He visited twice while I was in the hospital, then sent me a text saying he couldn't do this anymore. My parents, she paused, and Daniel saw her jaw clench. My parents paid for the first month of bills, then told me they'd done their duty, and I needed to figure out the rest on my own. Said I was old enough to handle my own problems. Jesus, Daniel breathed. I lost my job because I couldn't work. Lost my apartment because I couldn't pay rent. Lost my health insurance right when I needed it most. Each sentence was a hammer blow, delivered in that same flat tone. I've been living in a room at the Riverside Extended Stay for the past year. It's one of those pay-by-the-week places, the kind where nobody asks questions and everybody keeps their door locked. Daniel thought about his own modest apartment, the constant juggling of bills, the way he sometimes lay awake at night calculating whether he could afford to fix the car or if he'd have to risk it breaking down for another few months. But he'd never experienced the kind of freefall Lena was describing, the complete collapse of every safety net at once. I'm in pain most days, Lena said quietly, not the kind that ever completely goes away. And the medical bills, even with payment plans, I'm drowning. I work 2 jobs, data entry from home and night shifts at a convenience store. And it's still not enough. It's never enough. That's not fair, Daniel said, and immediately felt stupid. Of course it wasn't fair. When had life ever been fair? No, Lena agreed. It's not. She finally looked up at him, and there was something fierce in her expression, despite the tears that still clung to her lashes. But what really gets me isn't even the money or the pain or the fact that I'll probably never be completely normal again. It's the loneliness. It's the way people look right through me now, like I'm invisible, like I don't exist anymore because I stopped being useful or attractive or easy to be around. Daniel knew that invisibility. He'd felt it himself in the months after Sarah's death, when friends stopped calling because they didn't know what to say, when coworkers avoided him because grief made them uncomfortable, when his own reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. I realized today that I couldn't remember the last time someone hugged me, Lena said. Not a doctor touching me to examine an injury, not a boss giving me a professional handshake, an actual real hug from someone who saw me as a human being worth caring about, even for 30 seconds. She laughed bitterly. And I thought, I can't live like this anymore. I can't go another day without something. So you asked a stranger in a cafe. So I asked a stranger in a cafe. Lena wiped at her eyes with the napkin again. I know how pathetic that sounds. It doesn't sound pathetic, Daniel said firmly. It sounds desperate. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a moment, and Daniel became aware of how much time had passed. He pulled out his phone and checked the time. 40 minutes until he needed to pick up Mila from art class. He should probably wrap this up, let this woman go on her way, return to his carefully maintained boundaries between his private grief and the outside world. Instead, he heard himself say, "Have you eaten today?" Lena blinked. "What?" "Food. Have you had lunch?" No, actually, I was planning to just..." Daniel stood up. "Come on. There's a diner down the block that makes decent sandwiches. We've got about 35 minutes before I have to pick up my daughter." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to." He softened his tone. "Look, you did something incredibly brave today. Asking for help, admitting you needed something. That takes guts. Let me buy you a sandwich. No strings, no expectations, just 2 people who could both use some company." Lena studied his face for a long moment, and Daniel wondered what she saw there. Did she recognize the same loneliness she'd confessed to? Could she see the cracks in his carefully maintained composure? "Okay," she said finally, standing up slowly. "Thank you." They walked to Murphy's diner side by side, maintaining careful distance. Daniel noticed the way Lena moved, a slight limp favoring her right side, occasional winces when she stepped wrong. The injuries from her accident weren't just visible in scars. They'd become part of how she inhabited her own body. The diner was a neighborhood institution, the kind of place that had been serving the same menu for 30 years and saw no reason to change. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floor, laminated menus sticky with decades of use. A waitress named Maureen who'd been there so long she'd served Daniel's own parents when they were young. "Danny!" Maureen called out when they entered, using the nickname nobody else in his current life called him. Haven't seen you in here in ages. Where have you been hiding? Around, Daniel said, sliding into a booth. Lena sat across from him, looking uncertain. Just busy with work and Mila. That girl of yours must be getting so big. Maureen pulled out her order pad, but her curious eyes were on Lena. Who's your friend? Lena, this is Maureen. Maureen, Lena, we're just grabbing a quick lunch. If Maureen picked up on the tension in that introduction, she didn't show it. Well, any friend of Danny's is welcome here. What can I get you folks? Daniel ordered his usual, turkey club with fries. Lena hesitated, studying the menu with the careful attention of someone mentally calculating costs. Get whatever you want, Daniel said quietly. Really? She ordered a grilled cheese and soup, handing the menu back with a small smile of thanks. When Maureen left, Lena looked around the diner with something like nostalgia. My mom used to take me to a place like this, she said, every Saturday after my ballet class. We'd split a chocolate milkshake and she'd ask me about my week. She traced patterns on the table with her finger. That feels like a different lifetime. Do you still talk to her? Your mom? No? The word was clipped, final. I tried calling a few months after the accident. She told me I'd made my choices and I needed to live with them. I'm still not entirely sure what choices she meant. Getting hit by a drunk driver wasn't exactly something I planned. Daniel felt a surge of anger on her behalf. What kind of parents abandoned their child when she needed them most? He thought about his own parents, both gone now, his father to cancer when Daniel was in college, his mother to a sudden heart attack 3 years ago. But even in their absence, he'd never doubted their love or their willingness to sacrifice for him. What about you? Lena asked, clearly eager to shift the focus. You mentioned a daughter? Mila, she's 6. Daniel's expression softened the way it always did when he talked about his daughter. Smart as hell, curious about everything, makes friends with every stray cat in a 3-block radius. She sounds wonderful. She is. Daniel's throat tightened. She's the reason I get up every morning, the reason I keep going even when... He didn't finish the sentence, but Lena seemed to understand. You're a single dad? Widower. My wife Sarah died 18 months ago. Brain aneurysm. She was healthy one day, gone the next. The words still felt surreal even after all this time. Mila was 4.5. She doesn't fully understand death yet, just knows that mommy isn't coming back. Lena's expression crumpled with empathy. I'm so sorry. Yeah, Daniel rubbed his face tiredly. Yeah, me too. They sat with that shared understanding of loss for a moment, two people who'd been hollowed out by different types of grief, but who recognized the emptiness in each other. Is it okay? Lena asked hesitantly. Raising her on your own? Daniel considered the question. Some days are easier than others. I work from home doing freelance editing, which gives me flexibility. But it's hard. Everything is hard, making sure she eats vegetables, getting her to school on time, helping with homework when I'm exhausted, answering questions about why other kids have mommies, and she doesn't. But you're doing it. I don't really have a choice, Daniel said. She's my kid. She needs me. So I figure it out. Maureen returned with their food, and they ate in companionable silence. Daniel noticed Lena savoring each bite of her grilled cheese as if she hadn't had a decent meal in days, which he realized might actually be true. When had eating become a luxury for her? When had basic human comfort become something she had to beg strangers for? Can I ask you something? Lena said after finishing half her sandwich. Why did you say yes? To the hug, I mean. Most people would have walked away. Daniel set down his sandwich, thinking about the question. Honestly, I almost did walk away. My first instinct was to avoid the whole situation, pretend I hadn't heard you. So why didn't you? Because he struggled to articulate something he barely understood himself. Because I saw something in your eyes that I recognized. That specific kind of loneliness that comes from having people see right through you. And because since Sarah died, I've realized how much we all depend on these tiny moments of human connection to keep us from disappearing completely. That's exactly it, Lena breathed. Disappearing. That's what it feels like. So when you asked for something that simple and that profound, I couldn't say no, even if it was uncomfortable, even if it broke some unspoken rule about strangers and personal space. Daniel met her eyes. Sometimes breaking the rules is the only decent thing to do. They talked more as they finished eating, small details that painted pictures of their respective lives. Lena told him about her data entry work, the mind-numbing repetition of it, but also the way it let her mind drift while her hands did the mechanical work. She told him about her convenience store shifts, the regulars she'd come to recognize, the occasional kindness from a customer that sustained her through the harder nights. Daniel told her about his work editing technical manuals and grant proposals, how he'd once aspired to be an investigative journalist, but had settled into this quieter, more sustainable career when Mila was born. He told her about the art class Mila attended every Saturday, her budding obsession with painting animals, the way she narrated entire stories about her stuffed animals' adventures. When Daniel checked his phone again, he had 15 minutes to get to Mila's class. He signaled Maureen for the check, but Lena reached for her purse. "Don't even think about it," Daniel said firmly. "You already bought me lunch. I can at least cover the tip." "Next time." The words came out before he'd thought about them, and they both paused, recognizing the implication. There might be a next time. This might not be just one strange afternoon. "Next time," Lena echoed softly. They walked back toward the cafe where they'd met, and Daniel realized with surprise that the awkwardness had faded. This didn't feel like two strangers anymore. It felt like the beginning of something that might become friendship if they were both brave enough to let it. "Thank you," Lena said when they reached the corner where they'd part ways. "Not just for the hug or the lunch, but for treating me like a person, for not running away, for listening." "Thank you for asking," Daniel replied, "for being brave enough to reach out." Lena smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her, small and tentative but genuine. "Maybe I'll see you around?" "Maybe." Daniel pulled out his phone. "Actually, if you want, I'm here most Saturdays at the same time. Same table at Sullivan's if the weather's decent. If you ever want company, or just need to talk, or need another hug." He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Was this weird? Was he overstepping? But Lena's expression had brightened. "Really? Really? No pressure, just an open invitation." "I'd like that." Lena hesitated, then reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "You're a good person, Daniel Brooks." "I'm just a person," he corrected gently, trying to be less alone. They parted ways then, Lena heading toward the bus stop and Daniel toward the community center where Mila's art class was held. As he walked, Daniel felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, something that felt almost like hope, or maybe just the recognition that human connection could still surprise him, still break through the numbness that grief had imposed. Mila was waiting outside the classroom door, chattering with another little girl about something that involved lots of dramatic hand gestures. When she saw Daniel, her face lit up. "Daddy!" She ran to him and he scooped her up, pressing a kiss to her dark curls. She smelled like paint and the apple juice they always served at snack time. "Hey, Butterfly. How was class?" "So good. We painted autumn trees and Miss Rebecca said mine was very impressionistic." She frowned, working through the word. "I think that means good." "Impressionistic," Daniel corrected, setting her down but keeping hold of her hand. "And it definitely means good. Can I see it?" Mila proudly pulled a slightly damp painting from her folder, a riot of orange and red and yellow, more feeling than precise form, the kind of art that prioritized joy over accuracy. "See? It's like the trees are dancing." "It's beautiful, sweetheart." They walked toward the bus stop, Mila swinging their joined hands and launching into a detailed account of everything she'd done that afternoon. Daniel listened with half his attention, the other half still processing his encounter with Lena Hale. He hadn't told Lena about how lonely he'd been, but she'd somehow seen it anyway. In the year and a half since Sarah's death, Daniel had focused entirely on being strong for Mila, on maintaining routines and normalcy, on making sure his daughter felt secure and loved. But he'd let his own needs atrophy, convinced that his grief was something to manage privately, that asking for help or admitting vulnerability would somehow make him a worse father. Meeting Lena had cracked something open in him, a recognition that maybe he didn't have to carry everything alone, that maybe there was value in honest connection even when it came from unexpected places. "Daddy, you're not listening," Mila complained, tugging on his hand. "Sorry, Butterfly, what did you say?" "I asked if we can have pizza for dinner." Daniel smiled down at her. "Frozen pizza or delivery?" "Delivery!" Mila bounced on her toes. "With extra cheese." "Deal, but you have to eat some vegetables, too." "Can I have carrots with ranch?" "You can have carrots with ranch." "Deal!" Mila grinned up at him, and Daniel felt his heart squeeze with love for this small person who kept him tethered to the world. That night, after Mila was asleep, her room a chaos of stuffed animals and art supplies and books read halfway through, Daniel sat on the couch with his laptop, intending to work on a grant proposal that was due Monday. But his mind kept drifting back to the cafe, to Lena's hollow eyes and trembling hands, to the way she'd cried against his chest like someone who'd been holding it in for far too long. He thought about the randomness of it all, how he could have easily not been at that cafe today, how he could have been sitting inside instead of outside, how he could have said no to her request and walked away, leaving her to her loneliness and pain, and how different both their afternoons would have been if he had. Sometimes, Daniel thought, life hinged on tiny moments like that, on choices that seemed insignificant, but that rippled outward in ways you couldn't predict. He'd chosen to say yes to a stranger's desperate request, and now he was sitting here thinking about her, wondering if she'd made it home safely, hoping she'd felt a little less alone because of their conversation. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister, Elena, checking in as she did every few days. "How are you guys doing? Mila still obsessed with painting?" Daniel smiled and typed back, "We're okay. Mila's painting everything that doesn't move. I'm surviving. Met someone interesting today." The response was immediate. "Interesting how? Female interesting?" "Not like that. Just someone who needed a friend." "You being mysterious is not like you." "Details tomorrow?" "Maybe." "Go to sleep, Elena. Love you, little brother. Love you too." Daniel set his phone aside and closed his laptop, accepting that no work would happen tonight. Instead, he found himself thinking about next Saturday, wondering if Lena would actually show up at Sullivan's Cafe, or if today had been a one-time moment of connection that would fade into just another strange memory. Part of him hoped she wouldn't come. Connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risk, and risk was something Daniel had carefully eliminated from his life after Sarah died. He'd built walls around himself and Mila, creating a small, safe world where nothing unexpected could hurt them. But another part of him, the part that had felt something crack open when Lena smiled, hoped she would come. Hoped that maybe they could both be a little less lonely together. Hoped that saying yes to her impossible request might turn out to be the beginning of something neither of them had known they needed. Outside, the autumn wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending leaves skittering down the street. Daniel pulled a blanket around himself and sat in the dark living room, listening to the sounds of his daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, thinking about loneliness and connection and the courage it took to ask for help. And he realized that he'd been wrong about something. He'd thought he was doing Lena a favor today, offering kindness to someone in desperate need. But maybe she'd done him just as big a favor, reminding him that he was still capable of reaching beyond his own grief, still able to connect with another human being, still alive in ways he'd forgotten. The week ahead stretched out before him, familiar and predictable. But for the first time in months, Daniel found himself already anticipating Saturday afternoon, already wondering what Lena Hale's story would turn out to be, already curious about whether one hug and one conversation might be the start of something that would change both their lives. In the darkness of his living room, with his daughter's breathing carrying softly from the other room and the city settling into its nighttime rhythms outside, Daniel Brooks allowed himself the smallest flicker of hope. Not for romance or rescue or any fairy tale ending, just for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he and this broken stranger might help each other remember what it felt like to be seen, to be known, to matter to another person. And that, he thought as he finally headed to bed, might be enough. The following Saturday arrived with the kind of gray, drizzling rain that made the world feel smaller and more intimate. Daniel stood at his kitchen window, watching water streak down the glass while Mila sat at the table behind him, methodically eating her cereal one piece at a time while narrating an elaborate story about a family of bears who lived in a castle made of clouds. He'd thought about Lena Hale more than he cared to admit over the past week. Little moments would trigger memories of their conversation, seeing someone walking with a limp, hearing a news story about medical debt, passing the convenience store on Maple Street, and wondering if that's where she worked her night shifts. He'd found himself composing questions he wanted to ask her, observations he wanted to share, as if she'd already become a fixture in his life rather than a stranger he'd met once. But now, looking at the rain, he wondered if she'd come at all. The cafe had outdoor seating under an awning, but it wasn't exactly pleasant in weather like this. Maybe she'd decide it wasn't worth it. Maybe she'd had second thoughts about the whole thing, embarrassed by how much she'd revealed to someone she didn't know. "Daddy, you're staring at nothing again," Mila said, pulling him from his thoughts. "Just watching the rain, Butterfly." "Can we still go to art class?" "Of course, rain won't stop us." Mila wrinkled her nose. "I don't like getting wet." "That's why we have umbrellas." Daniel checked the time, still an hour before they needed to leave. An hour before he'd know whether Lena would show up at Sullivan's Cafe or whether last Saturday would remain an isolated moment of connection, strange and brief and ultimately inconsequential. The morning dragged. Daniel tried to work on editing a particularly dense environmental impact report, but his concentration kept fracturing. Mila played with her stuffed animals, creating increasingly complex storylines that involved drama, betrayal, and reconciliation. Impressive narrative skills for a 6-year-old, though Daniel worried sometimes about where she picked up concepts like betrayal. Finally, it was time to go. They bundled up in rain jackets, Mila insisting on wearing her bright yellow boots with the ladybug pattern. The walk to the community center took them past Sullivan's Cafe, and Daniel found his pace slowing as they approached, his eyes scanning the outdoor seating area. She was there. Lena sat at the same table where they'd met the week before, hunched over a paper cup with both hands wrapped around it for warmth. She wore a thin jacket that looked inadequate for the weather, and her hair was damp from the rain, but she was there, and something in Daniel's chest loosened at the sight of her. "Who's that lady?" Mila asked, following his gaze. "Just someone I met last week." "Is she your friend?" Daniel considered the question. Were they friends? Could you call someone a friend after one conversation? "Maybe," he said. "I'm not sure yet." "She looks sad," Mila observed with the blunt honesty of children. "She does look sad, doesn't she?" Daniel crouched down to Mila's level. "Listen, Butterfly. After I drop you off at art class, I'm going to come back here and talk to that lady for a little while. Is that okay with you?" Mila studied Lena with serious eyes. "Are you going to make her not sad?" "I'm going to try to be her friend. Sometimes having a friend helps with sadness." "Like how Elena makes you not sad sometimes?" Daniel's throat tightened. His daughter was far too perceptive. "Yeah, exactly like that." "Okay," Mila took his hand again. "But you have to come get me on time. Miss Rebecca says being on time is responsible, and I promise I'll be there right on time." They continued to the community center, Mila skipping through puddles despite Daniel's half-hearted protests. At the classroom door, she turned and gave him a fierce hug around his waist. "Be nice to the sad lady," she whispered. "I will. And bring her inside where it's not rainy." Daniel smiled. "That's a good idea." He watched Mila disappear into the classroom, her bright yellow boots the last thing he saw before the door swung shut. Then he turned and walked back through the rain toward Sullivan's Cafe, his heart beating faster than the situation warranted. Lena looked up as he approached, and the relief that flooded her expression was almost painful to witness. She'd been worried he wouldn't come. Or worse, she'd been worried he wouldn't remember that last week's kindness had been a momentary aberration rather than a genuine offer of connection. "Hi," she said, standing awkwardly, as if uncertain whether she should offer a handshake or a hug or just stay seated. "Hi." Daniel gestured toward the cafe's door. "Want to go inside? It's pretty miserable out here." "I didn't want to take up a table without buying anything," Lena admitted. "I know they don't like people just sitting." "Then we'll buy something. Come on." Inside, Sullivan's was warm and steamy, windows fogged with condensation. The Saturday morning crowd was light, a few college students with laptops, an elderly couple sharing a newspaper, a harried-looking mother with a toddler who was systematically destroying a muffin. Daniel led Lena to a booth in the back corner, away from the main traffic. "What do you want?" he asked, already pulling out his wallet. "Daniel, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. What do you want?" Lena bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable with accepting more charity, but eventually said, "Coffee. Just black coffee." "Have you eaten breakfast?" "I had some toast." Daniel gave her a look that said he knew she was probably lying, then went to the counter and ordered 2 coffees, a stack of pancakes, and a breakfast sandwich. When he returned to the booth, Lena was staring out the window at the rain, her expression distant. "Penny for your thoughts," Daniel said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you'd really be here," Lena said quietly. "All week. I kept thinking maybe I'd imagined how nice you were. Or maybe you'd had second thoughts about the weird woman who asked you for a hug." "I didn't have second thoughts." Daniel paused, then added honestly, "Well, I had some thoughts, but not about not coming." "What kind of thoughts?" "Wondering if you'd show up. Wondering what we'd talk about. Wondering if this was going to be awkward or if last week was just a fluke." He smiled slightly. "Wondering if I was making a mistake letting someone new into my very carefully controlled life." "And?" Lena met his eyes. "Are you making a mistake?" "I don't think so," Daniel said, "but I guess we'll find out." The waitress brought their order and Lena's eyes widened at the amount of food. "I can't eat all this." "Then eat what you can and I'll help with the rest." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the kind of quiet that felt natural rather than strained. Daniel watched Lena savor the pancakes, eating slowly as if to make the experience last, and he wondered again when decent meals had become a luxury for her. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said eventually, setting down her fork. "Why are you being so nice to me? I've been thinking about it all week, and I can't figure out what you get out of this." "Does there have to be something I get out of it?" "In my experience, yes. People don't just help strangers for no reason." Daniel considered her cynicism and couldn't entirely blame her for it. Her life had taught her that people were conditional, that kindness came with strings, that vulnerability was punished rather than met with compassion. "Maybe I'm being selfish," he said. "Maybe I needed to remember that I could still connect with another human being, that I wasn't completely numb, that there was still some point to reaching beyond my own grief and my own small world." Lena studied him carefully. "You're not numb." "I have been. For months after Sarah died, I was just going through motions, taking care of Mila, working, keeping us fed and clean and functional, but not really feeling anything except this low-grade panic that I was going to screw everything up." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "And then you asked me for a hug, and I felt something. Compassion, maybe. Or recognition. And it reminded me that I was still alive, still capable of caring about someone else's pain. So I was your therapy," Lena said, but there was no bitterness in it, just curiosity. "Maybe we're each other's therapy." Daniel leaned back against the booth. "Look, I'm not trying to rescue you or fix you or turn you into some kind of project. I just thought maybe we could both use a friend. Someone who understands what it's like to have your life fall apart. Someone who won't try to force positivity or tell you to look on the bright side, or any of that bullshit people say when they don't know what else to do." Lena's expression softened. "I would really like that," she said quietly. "A friend. I haven't had one of those in a long time." "Me neither, if I'm being honest. Everyone I used to be close with kind of drifted away after Sarah died. They didn't know how to be around grief, so they just stopped being around." "People are terrible with pain," Lena agreed. "They want you to get better on their timeline, and when you don't, they decide you're too much work." They talked for the next hour, conversation flowing more easily than it had the week before. Lena told Daniel about her convenience store job, the cast of characters who came in during her night shifts, the nurses getting off from the hospital across the street, the insomniacs buying ice cream at 3 a.m, the homeless man named Robert who always counted out exact change in pennies and nickels. Daniel told her about his editing work, the absurd bureaucratic language he had to wade through, the satisfaction of taking something incomprehensible and making it clear. He told her about Mila's latest obsession with painting animals that didn't exist, purple elephants with butterfly wings, cats with fishtails, dogs with peacock feathers. She sounds amazing, Lena said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. You must be so proud of her. I am. She's the best thing in my life. Daniel glanced at his phone, 30 minutes until art class ended. Actually, I should probably start heading that way soon. Of course. Lena started to gather her things, but Daniel stopped her. Wait, I was thinking, if you're not busy, would you want to come with me to pick her up? Maybe walk with us for a bit afterward? Lena froze. You want me to meet your daughter? Only if you're comfortable with it. No pressure. Daniel realized how this might sound. I'm not trying to introduce you as anything specific, just as someone I'm talking to. Mila's curious about you. She saw you sitting outside earlier and asked who you were. What did you tell her? That you might be my friend, that I wasn't sure yet. Daniel smiled slightly. She told me I should bring you inside where it's not rainy. She's very bossy for a 6-year-old. Lena laughed, a real laugh that transformed her face. I would like to meet her, if you're sure. I'm sure. They walked to the community center together, Daniel holding an umbrella over both of them. Lena was quiet, and he could sense her nervousness about meeting Mila. He understood that anxiety, the fear of being judged, of not measuring up, of children seen through facades with their brutal honesty. The art class was letting out when they arrived, children streaming through the doors with paintings and drawings clutched carefully in small hands. Mila emerged in a cluster of kids, but she spotted Daniel immediately and broke away from the group. Daddy? She started to run to him, then caught sight of Lena and slowed, suddenly shy. Hey, Butterfly, how was class? Daniel crouched down to her level. I brought a friend. This is Lena. Lena, this is Mila. Hi, Mila said softly, studying Lena with those serious dark eyes that missed nothing. Hi, Mila. Lena knelt down too, bringing herself to the child's height. Your dad tells me you're an amazing artist. I'm okay, Mila said, with the modest confidence of someone who knew she was actually pretty good. Do you like art? I used to paint, actually. Before... Lena trailed off, and Daniel saw the moment she decided not to burden a child with her story. I liked it a lot. What did you paint today? Mila carefully unrolled her painting, a remarkably detailed scene of a rainy day, complete with puddles that reflected the sky and umbrella-carrying figures rendered in impressionistic strokes. Oh, wow, Lena breathed, and her admiration was genuine. Mila, this is really beautiful. Look at how you captured the rain and the reflections in the puddles. That's advanced technique. Mila beamed. Miss Rebecca said I have a good eye for details. Miss Rebecca is absolutely right. Lena looked up at Daniel. She's talented. Really talented. I keep telling her that, Daniel said, standing and taking Mila's hand. But she thinks I'm biased because I'm her dad. You are biased, Mila informed him seriously. But that's okay. Bias means love. Lena laughed again, and Daniel felt something warm settle in his chest at the sound. They started walking, Mila between them, chattering about her art class and the other kids, and a complicated story about someone named Emma who had spilled paint on someone named Jackson, and how Jackson had cried, but then Emma shared her snack, so now they were friends again. That was very kind of Emma, Lena said. Sharing is a good way to make things better after an accident. That's what Miss Rebecca said, too. Mila looked up at Lena with sudden intensity. Did you get hurt? You walk like it hurts sometimes. Mila, Daniel said sharply, that's not... It's okay, Lena interrupted gently. She stopped walking and knelt down again so she was eye level with Mila. You're very observant. Yes, I did get hurt. I was in a car accident a while ago, and sometimes my body still hurts from it. Does it hurt right now? Mila asked with the matter-of-fact concern of children. A little bit, but not too bad today. I'm sorry you got hurt, Mila said seriously. Then, with no warning, she stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Lena's neck in a fierce hug. Daniel watched Lena's face crumple, watched her arms come up to embrace his daughter carefully, watched her close her eyes against tears. When Mila pulled back, Lena was smiling through the wetness on her cheeks. Thank you, Lena whispered. That was exactly what I needed. Hugs make things better, Mila said with absolute certainty. Daddy says so. Your daddy is very smart. They continued walking, and Daniel felt something shift in the dynamic. His daughter had accepted Lena with the easy grace children had before they learned to be suspicious, before they developed the protective cynicism adults wore like armor. And Lena, for her part, talked to Mila like a real person rather than talking down to her or forcing false enthusiasm. Can Lena come to our house? Mila asked suddenly, looking up at Daniel with hopeful eyes. Daniel glanced at Lena, whose expression was carefully neutral. That's up to Lena, Butterfly. She might have other things she needs to do. I don't, actually, Lena said quietly. If the invitation is genuine, I'd like to come, but I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. Right, Daddy? Right, Daniel agreed, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. You're not imposing. Their apartment was small but comfortable, the kind of space that had been carefully organized to make the most of limited square footage. Daniel had painted the walls soft colors, hung curtains that Sarah had picked out years ago, filled shelves with books and Mila's artwork and photographs of happier times. It was a home, even if it sometimes felt haunted by absence. This is nice, Lena said, looking around with genuine appreciation. It feels warm. Daddy says warm is better than big, Mila announced, already kicking off her boots and running toward her room. I'm going to show you my paintings. Mila, maybe let Lena sit down first, Daniel called after her, but his daughter was already gone. He turned to Lena apologetically. Sorry, she gets excited about new people. Don't apologize, she's wonderful. Lena's voice was thick with emotion. I can't remember the last time a child hugged me like that, like I was worthy of it. You are worthy of it, Daniel said firmly. I know you don't believe that right now, but you are. Mila returned carrying an armful of paintings, which she proceeded to spread across the coffee table while explaining each one in elaborate detail. Lena listened attentively, asking questions that showed she was really paying attention, offering observations that made Mila light up with pride. Daniel made coffee and watched them from the kitchen, his daughter and this broken stranger who had stumbled into their lives a week ago. He'd been so careful since Sarah died, so protective of their small bubble of two. Letting anyone new in felt like a risk he couldn't afford. But watching Mila laugh at something Lena said, watching Lena's face soften with genuine affection, he wondered if maybe isolation was its own kind of risk. Lena, do you want to paint with me? Mila asked, already pulling out her art supplies. Mila, that might be too much, Daniel started, but Lena interrupted. I'd love to, she said, but I'm not very good anymore. My hands shake sometimes. That's okay. Shaky can be a style. Mila set up paper and paints with the efficiency of someone who did this often. See? I'll do a shaky painting too, so you don't feel bad. Daniel brought the coffee to the living room and sat in the armchair while Lena and Mila painted side by side at the coffee table. They worked in companionable silence, occasionally broken by Mila's narration of what she was creating, a forest at night with fireflies, apparently, and Lena's quiet responses. Daniel pulled out his phone to check email, but mostly he just watched them. Lena's hands did shake slightly as she held the brush, and her painting was simpler than Mila's, less controlled. But there was something peaceful in her expression, something that had been absent the previous week. The hollow desperation had been replaced by tentative contentment, as if she'd found an unexpected moment of belonging in this small apartment with a widowed father and his talkative daughter. Daddy, look! Mila held up her painting, which was indeed a forest scene with yellow dots representing fireflies. And look at Lena's. Lena's painting was abstract, swirls of blue and green and purple that suggested water or sky, or maybe emotion rendered in color. It wasn't technically skilled, but it had a raw honesty that made Daniel's throat tighten. It's beautiful, he said, and meant it. It's just colors, Lena said self-consciously. I couldn't remember how to paint anything real. Sometimes colors are enough, Daniel said. Sometimes they say more than real things do. They ordered pizza for lunch, and Mila insisted Lena help her build a fort out of couch cushions while they waited for delivery. Daniel watched his daughter command this virtual stranger with the authority of a tiny general, and watched Lena follow instructions with good-natured patience. The fort was lopsided and structurally unsound, but Mila declared it perfect and proceeded to give them both tours of its various features, the observation deck, the secret escape tunnel, the treasure room. You have to pay a toll to enter, Mila informed them seriously. The toll is one hug. That seems fair, Lena said, crouching down to embrace the little girl who had somehow decided she was trustworthy. Over Mila's shoulder, her eyes met Daniel's, and he saw gratitude there so profound it almost hurt to witness. When the pizza arrived, they ate in the lopsided fort, Mila chattering about everything and nothing, while Daniel and Lena listened and occasionally caught each other's eyes with shared amusement. It felt almost normal, this strange little gathering, like they were a unit rather than three separate people who barely knew each other. After lunch, Mila started to fade, her energy depleted by art class and fort building and constant talking. She climbed into Lena's lap without asking permission, which was unusual for her. Mila was typically cautious with new people, and yawned dramatically. "Are you sleepy, Butterfly?" Daniel asked. "No," Mila insisted, even as her eyes drooped. "I'm just resting." "Want to watch a movie?" Lena suggested, and Mila nodded against her shoulder. They settled on the couch, Daniel scrolling through streaming options while Mila nestled against Lena like they'd known each other for years rather than hours. Eventually, they landed on an animated film about a girl who befriended a dragon, and Mila made it approximately 15 minutes before falling asleep, her small body relaxed and trusting against Lena's side. "I should probably move her to her bed," Daniel whispered. "Let her sleep for a minute," Lena whispered back. Her hand rested gently on Mila's hair, and there was such tenderness in the gesture that Daniel had to look away. "She feels nice, warm and real and uncomplicated." They sat in silence, the movie playing to an audience of one conscious adult, and Daniel thought about how strange life was. A week ago, he'd been alone at a cafe, counting down the minutes of solitude before returning to his responsibilities. Now there was a woman he barely knew sitting on his couch, with his daughter asleep in her arms, and it felt more right than wrong, more like possibility than threat. "Thank you," Lena said after a while, her voice barely audible. "For today, for letting me meet her, for trusting me with something precious." "Thank you for coming," Daniel replied. "For giving us a chance, too." "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," Lena admitted. "For you to realize I'm too broken, too complicated, too much work, for this to be too good to be true." "What if it's not too good to be true?" Daniel said. "What if it's just good?" Lena didn't answer, but she smiled slightly, and Daniel decided that was enough for now. They watched the rest of the movie in comfortable silence while Mila slept, and when it ended, Daniel carefully lifted his daughter and carried her to her bedroom. She stirred slightly when he laid her down, mumbling something about fireflies and dragons, then settled back into deep sleep. When he returned to the living room, Lena was standing awkwardly, clearly preparing to leave. "I should go," she said. "I've taken up your whole afternoon." "You didn't take anything. We wanted you here." Daniel grabbed a pad of paper from the counter and scribbled his phone number. "Here, in case you ever need anything, or just want to talk, or—" He trailed off, suddenly uncertain what he was offering. Lena took the paper carefully, as if it might disintegrate. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Daniel paused, then decided to be honest. "Look, I don't know what this is yet, but I know I want to find out. And I know that Mila liked you, which is rare. And I know that I haven't felt this much like myself in months, so yeah, I'm sure." "Okay," Lena said softly. "Okay." She wrote her own number on the pad and handed it back to him. "Same goes for you," or "If you ever need anything, or just want to talk, or—" She smiled slightly, "or if Mila wants to paint again." Daniel walked her to the door, and they stood in the hallway for a moment, neither quite ready to end the day. Finally, Lena stepped forward and hugged him. Not the desperate, broken embrace from the cafe last week, but something gentler, more grateful. "I'll see you soon," she said against his shoulder. "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "You will." He watched her walk down the hallway toward the stairs, and she turned back once to wave before disappearing around the corner. Daniel stood there for a long moment, thinking about coincidence and timing and the strange ways people entered your life when you least expected it. When he went back inside, Mila was awake, standing in the living room rubbing her eyes. "Did Lena leave?" "Yeah, she had to go home." "Is she going to come back?" Daniel crouched down and pulled his daughter into a hug. "I think so," Would you like that? Yes, Mila said firmly. She's nice and sad, but the nice is louder than the sad. What does that mean? It means even though she's sad, she's still nice to people. That's important. Mila pulled back and looked at her father seriously. We should keep her, Daddy. We don't keep people, Butterfly. They're not stray cats. But we can be friends with them and make them not lonely, right? Daniel's chest tightened with love for this perceptive little human. Right. We can definitely do that. That night, after Mila was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for today. I can't remember the last time I felt like I belonged somewhere. Lena. He saved her number and wrote back, Thank you for trusting us. You're welcome here anytime. The response came quickly. Be careful making offers like that. I might take you up on it. Good, Daniel typed. I hope you do. He set his phone aside and sat in the dark living room, thinking about the day, about the way Mila had climbed into Lena's lap without hesitation, about the sound of Lena's laugh when his daughter said something ridiculous, about the way it had felt to have another adult in the apartment who wasn't measuring him against expectations or judging his parenting or looking at him with pity. It had felt normal, and normal was something Daniel hadn't experienced in so long he'd almost forgotten what it was like. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under streetlights. Daniel stood at the window looking out at the wet streets, at the couples walking home from late dinners, at the lit windows of other apartments where other lives were unfolding. He thought about Lena in her room at the Riverside extended stay, wondered if she was looking out her window too, if she was thinking about today, if she was feeling the same cautious hope that was unfurling in his own chest like something fragile and new. His phone buzzed again, and Daniel smiled before even looking at it, already knowing it would be her, already anticipating whatever small thought she wanted to share before the night ended. And in that moment, standing at his window with his daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room and this unexpected connection brightening the darkness, Daniel Brooks allowed himself to believe that maybe life could surprise him in good ways again. That maybe saying yes to a stranger's desperate request had been the beginning of something neither of them had known they needed, but both of them had been waiting for all along. The text message from Lena had said simply, "Can I call you?" And Daniel had responded immediately with yes, his heart rate picking up for reasons he didn't want to examine too closely. When his phone rang 3 minutes later, he stepped out onto the small balcony so he wouldn't wake Mila, pulling the door closed behind him. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice low. "Everything okay?" "I don't know." Lena's voice was tight with something between fear and anger. "I just got home from my shift at the convenience store, and there was someone sitting in a car outside my building. When I walked past, they took pictures of me. With a real camera, not a phone, like they were documenting something." Daniel's chest tightened. "Did you call the police?" "And tell them what? That someone took my picture on a public street?" Lena laughed bitterly. "They wouldn't care. But Daniel, it felt wrong, deliberate, like whoever it was has been watching me. Maybe it was just... It wasn't random," Lena interrupted. "They were waiting for me. And when I looked back after I went inside, the car was still there, just sitting, watching." Daniel's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. "Are you safe right now? Is your door locked?" "Yes, but I'm scared." Her voice cracked. "I know I'm probably overreacting. I know I'm probably being paranoid. But after everything that's happened, after being alone for so long, I can't help thinking that anything good in my life is just going to get taken away. And you and Mila, you're the first good thing I've had in years, and now someone's watching me and I'm terrified it's going to ruin everything." "Nothing's going to ruin anything," Daniel said with more confidence than he felt. "Listen to me. You're not overreacting. If something feels wrong, trust that instinct. Stay inside tonight, keep your door locked, and tomorrow we'll figure out what's going on, okay?" "Okay." Lena took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry for calling so late. I just didn't know who else." "Don't apologize. I'm glad you called. I want you to call if something's wrong." Daniel paused. "Do you want me to stay on the phone with you for a while, until you feel safer? Would you?" "Of course." They talked for nearly an hour, Lena's fear gradually subsiding as Daniel kept up a steady stream of conversation about nothing important. A ridiculous grant proposal he was editing, Mila's latest obsession with learning to whistle, a documentary he'd watched about deep-sea creatures. Normal things, mundane things, the kind of everyday details that reminded both of them that the world could be ordinary and safe. "Thank you," Lena said finally, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "I should let you sleep." "Text me when you wake up tomorrow," Daniel said, "just so I know you're okay." "I will. Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Lena." Daniel stood on this balcony for a long time after hanging up, staring at the city lights and trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his gut. Someone taking pictures of Lena. Someone watching her building. It could be innocent. A private investigator working a different case. A photographer doing street photography. Someone who'd mistaken her for someone else. But it could also be something more sinister, and Daniel had learned the hard way that when something felt wrong, it usually was. He went back inside and checked on Mila, who was sprawled across her bed with stuffed animals scattered around her like a protective army. The sight of her peaceful sleep made his chest ache with fierce protectiveness. He'd do anything to keep her safe, to preserve the small bubble of security they'd built. But now that bubble had expanded to include Lena, and he found himself feeling equally protective of this broken stranger who'd stumbled into their lives asking for a hug. The next morning was Sunday, which meant lazy breakfast and Mila's favorite cartoons. Daniel made pancakes while his daughter sat at the kitchen table drawing yet another elaborate scene involving animals that shouldn't exist together in nature. This time a tea party attended by a penguin, a giraffe, and something that might have been a dragon or might have been a very enthusiastic lizard. His phone buzzed with a text from Lena. "Awake, doors still locked. No more strange cars. Maybe I was just being paranoid." "Not paranoid," Daniel typed back. "Cautious. There's a difference." "What are you doing today?" "Work from home, data entry. Very exciting. Want company?" "Mila and I could bring lunch." There was a long pause before her response came. "You don't have to do that." "I know. Do you want us to or not?" "Yes." "Please." Daniel smiled at his phone, then looked up to find Mila watching him with knowing eyes. "We're going to see Lena," she announced, not asking, but stating. "How did you know that?" "You smile different when you talk to her." Mila returned her attention to her drawing. "It's a good different. You're too smart for 6 years old. That's what Miss Rebecca says, too." They showed up at the Riverside Extended Stay around noon carrying Chinese takeout and the board game Mila had insisted Lena needed to learn. The building was exactly as depressing as Daniel had imagined, a rundown complex that rented rooms by the week to people who'd run out of better options. The hallway smelled like cigarettes and mildew, and several of the overhead lights were burned out. Lena's room was on the second floor, and she opened the door almost immediately after Daniel knocked, as if she'd been waiting by the entrance. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept well despite their phone conversation. "Hi," she said, stepping back to let them in. "Sorry about the mess. I wasn't expecting—" She gestured vaguely at the small space, which was actually remarkably clean considering its size and condition. The room was barely large enough for a double bed, a small table with 2 chairs, and a mini fridge. A hot plate sat on the table next to a microwave that had seen better days. Clothes were neatly folded in plastic bins against the wall, and the few personal items Lena owned were arranged on a single shelf. Some books, a framed photograph of younger people Daniel assumed were her parents, a small collection of shells that looked like they'd been gathered from a beach somewhere. "This is cozy," Mila said with the diplomatic kindness she'd inherited from her mother. "Like a tiny house." "That's a nice way to think about it," Lena said, managing a smile. "I like tiny houses." They spread the Chinese food across the small table, and Mila insisted on sitting on the bed so the adults could have the chairs. She ate her fried rice while narrating the plot of the cartoon she'd watched that morning, something involving time travel and talking vegetables that Daniel couldn't quite follow, but that seemed to make perfect sense to Lena. "So the broccoli goes back in time to prevent the potato from becoming French fries," Lena summarized when Mila finally paused for breath. "Exactly," Mila beamed. "You're a very good listener." "I had a good teacher," Lena said, catching Daniel's eye briefly. After lunch, Mila set up the board game, something involving collecting cards and building kingdoms that had rules she'd mostly invented herself. Daniel watched Lena relax as they played, her earlier fear fading as his daughter's enthusiasm filled the small room with warmth and noise and laughter. But when Mila went to use the bathroom, Lena's expression darkened immediately. "The car was back this morning," she said quietly. "Different car, same feeling. Someone's definitely watching me." "Did you get a license plate number?" "No. They were too far away and I was scared to get closer." Lena twisted her hands together. "Daniel, what if someone's investigating me for something? What if there's some mistake with my medical bills or insurance and they think I'm committing fraud? What if they're going to arrest me?" "Then we'll deal with it," Daniel said firmly. "But I don't think that's what this is." "What do you think it is?" Daniel hesitated, not wanting to voice the suspicion that had been growing in his mind. "I think maybe we should be careful for a while. I think maybe someone wants information about you, and we should figure out who and why before—" The bathroom door opened and Mila emerged, immediately sensing the tension. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, Butterfly," Daniel said quickly. "Just grown-up talk." "Is Lena in trouble?" Mila looked between them with worried eyes. "No," Lena said, but her voice wasn't convincing. "Everything's fine." Mila walked over and took Lena's hand, squeezing it with fierce determination. "If someone's being mean to you, Daddy will fix it. He's very good at fixing things." "I don't know if I can fix this one, sweetheart," Daniel admitted. "Then we'll all fix it together," Mila declared. "That's what families do." The word hung in the air, families, and Daniel saw Lena's eyes fill with tears. She pulled Mila into a tight hug, and over his daughter's shoulder she mouthed thank you to Daniel with such gratitude it made his chest ache. They spent the rest of the afternoon playing games and watching a movie on Daniel's laptop since Lena's room didn't have a television. When evening approached and Mila started getting restless, Daniel knew they needed to head home. But the thought of leaving Lena alone in this depressing room while someone potentially watched from the street made him uncomfortable. "Come stay with us tonight," he said suddenly. "The couch pulls out into a bed. It's not fancy, but it's probably more comfortable than—" He gestured around the room. "I can't impose like that." "You're not imposing, I'm inviting. There's a difference." Daniel kept his voice gentle but firm. "Please, I'll feel better knowing you're somewhere safe." Lena looked between him and Mila, clearly torn between pride and fear. "Are you sure?" "Very sure," Mila chimed in. "You can sleep in my room if you want. I have lots of stuffed animals for protection." "The couch is fine," Lena said, finally smiling. "But thank you, Mila, that's very generous." She packed a small overnight bag, just a change of clothes and toiletries, and they left the Riverside extended stay together. Daniel kept watch as they walked to his car, scanning for anyone who might be observing them, but the street seemed empty of threats. Still, the uneasy feeling persisted. Back at the apartment, Daniel set up the pull-out couch while Lena helped Mila with her nightly routine. He could hear them in the bathroom, his daughter explaining her elaborate toothbrushing system while Lena made appropriate impressed noises. When Mila emerged in her pajamas, she went straight to Lena and hugged her goodnight. "Sleep good," Mila said seriously. "The couch is magic. Daddy says so." "I never said that," Daniel protested. "You said it was the most comfortable couch ever. That's basically magic." After Mila was in bed, Daniel and Lena sat in the living room with tea, speaking in low voices so they wouldn't wake the child in the next room. The apartment felt different with Lena in it, fuller somehow, less haunted by absence. "Thank you for this," Lena said, cradling her mug. "I know it's weird, having someone you barely know staying over." "We're past barely knowing each other," Daniel said. "I think we crossed that line somewhere around the convenience store conversation last week. Still, this is beyond. Lena." Daniel waited until she met his eyes. "Stop apologizing for existing. Stop apologizing for needing things. Stop treating basic human kindness like it's an imposition." "That's hard for me," she admitted. "After so long of being told I was too much, too needy, too broken, it's hard to believe anyone would actually want me around." "Well, believe it, because Mila and I both want you around. You make my daughter laugh. You make this apartment feel less empty. You make me feel less—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Less stuck." "Stuck?" "Yeah, like I've been frozen in place since Sarah died, just going through the motions. But talking to you, spending time with you, it's like I'm starting to thaw out, starting to remember what it feels like to be alive instead of just surviving. Lena set down her mug and moved to sit next to him on the couch, close, but not touching. "You've done the same for me," she said quietly. "I was disappearing, becoming invisible. And then you saw me, really saw me, and invited me into this beautiful life you've built with your daughter. And I know I don't deserve it, but stop." Daniel turned to face her fully. "You do deserve it. You deserve kindness and friendship, and people who give a damn about whether you're okay. The fact that you've been denied those things doesn't mean you're not worthy of them." They sat in silence for a moment, and Daniel became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how easy it would be to reach out and take her hand. But this wasn't about romance or attraction, not yet, maybe not ever. This was about two lonely people finding unexpected solace in each other's company, and Daniel didn't want to complicate that with gestures that meant more than either of them was ready for. "We should probably sleep," he said finally. "Tomorrow, I'm going to make some calls, see if I can figure out who might be watching you." "You really don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Daniel stood and offered her a hand up. "Get some rest. And Lena, if you need anything in the night, water, extra blankets, someone to talk to, my room is right there. Don't hesitate." "Okay." She squeezed his hand briefly before letting go. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night." Daniel lay awake in his room for a long time, listening to the sounds of the apartment settling, aware that there was another person in his space who wasn't his daughter. It felt strange and right at the same time, like trying on new clothes that fit surprisingly well despite being unfamiliar. He must have eventually fallen asleep because he woke to his phone ringing at 7 in the morning. The number was unfamiliar, and Daniel answered groggily. "Hello? Is this Daniel Brooks?" The voice was male, formal, with the crisp diction of someone used to authority. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Richard Montgomery. I'm calling about a young woman named Lena Hale. I understand you've been spending time with her recently." Daniel was immediately alert, his mind racing. "How did you get this number?" "That's not important. What's important is that you understand who you're dealing with, Mr. Brooks. Lena Hale is unstable. She has a history of making poor decisions, of becoming inappropriately attached to people who show her kindness. I'm calling as a courtesy to warn you that she may not be safe to have around your daughter." "Who the hell are you?" Daniel demanded, keeping his voice low so he wouldn't wake Lena or Mila. "I'm someone who cares about the safety of children," Richard Montgomery said smoothly. "And I'm concerned that you're allowing a woman with documented mental health issues to have access to your young daughter. If something were to happen—" "Nothing is going to happen," Daniel interrupted. "And you can take your concerns and—" "I'm trying to help you, Mr. Brooks, before this situation becomes something you regret. Before you have to explain to authorities why you allowed an unstable woman to—" Daniel hung up, his hand shaking with anger. He sat on the edge of his bed, trying to process what had just happened. Someone had hired a private investigator to watch Lena. Someone had gotten his phone number. Someone was threatening him with vague implications about his daughter's safety. But who? And why? He walked into the living room to find Lena already awake, sitting on the edge of the pull-out couch with her head in her hands. She looked up when she heard him, and her expression was devastated. "They called you," she said. It wasn't a question. "Who called me? Who's Richard Montgomery?" "He works for them." Lena's voice was hollow. "For Sarah's parents." Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "What?" "Your in-laws. They're the ones investigating me. They're the ones trying to—" She broke off, tears streaming down her face. "I should have known this would happen. I should have known I'd ruin everything." "Wait, slow down." Daniel sat next to her, his mind struggling to catch up. "How do you know my in-laws are behind this?" "Because Richard Montgomery called me too, yesterday. He said he was conducting an investigation on behalf of concerned family members. He asked me about my medical history, my mental health, whether I'd ever been treated for depression or anxiety or—" Lena wiped at her face angrily. "He made it sound like I was some kind of predator, like I deliberately targeted you and Mila. That's insane." "Is it?" Lena looked at him with anguished eyes. "Think about how this looks from their perspective. Their son-in-law starts spending time with some random woman who has medical debt and no family and a history of depression, a woman who's suddenly very involved with their granddaughter. Of course they're suspicious. Of course they think I'm after something. Daniel's mind was reeling. Sarah's parents, Robert and Catherine Montgomery, had been difficult since Sarah's death. They'd questioned his parenting decisions, implied he wasn't capable of raising Mila alone, pushed for more custody time than he was comfortable with. But hiring a private investigator? Threatening him? This was a new level of interference. They can't do this, he said, more to himself than to Lena. They can't just— Yes, they can, Lena interrupted. They have money and resources, and they care about protecting Mila, which is noble, actually, which is what grandparents should do. Her voice cracked. And I'm the threat they're protecting her from. You're not a threat, aren't I? Lena stood up, pacing the small living room. Look at my life, Daniel. Look at everything that's wrong with me. The medical debt, the depression, the fact that I'm living in a pay-by-the-week motel, the fact that I asked a stranger for a hug because I was so desperate for human contact. What if they're right? What if I am unstable? What if I am dangerous? Stop it, Daniel stood too, catching her by the shoulders. You are not dangerous. You're someone who's been through hell and is still standing. You're someone who treats my daughter with kindness and makes her laugh. You're someone who's honest about your pain instead of pretending everything's fine. None of that makes you a threat. But they think I am, and they're going to make you choose between me and Mila. The words hung between them, and Daniel realized with sick certainty that she was right. This was what the phone call had been about. Not just a warning, but an ultimatum. Distance yourself from Lena Hale, or face consequences. Lose access to your daughter. Be painted as an unfit parent who prioritizes a relationship with an unstable woman over his child's safety. I have to go, Lena said, pulling away from him. I have to leave before I make this worse. You're not going anywhere. Daniel, you're not listening. If I stay, they'll use me against you. They'll petition for custody. They'll build a case that you're not fit to parent Mila because you're exposing her to what? To friendship? To kindness? To someone who treats her with respect and affection? Daniel's voice rose despite his efforts to keep it down. No, I'm not letting them bully me, and I'm not letting them bully you. This isn't about being bullied. This is about reality. They have the resources to destroy you, and I'm the weapon they'll use to do it. Then we'll fight back. With what? Lena laughed bitterly. I have nothing, Daniel. No money, no lawyer, no way to defend myself against whatever they're claiming about me. And you're a single father with a freelance income trying to raise a 6-year-old. You can't afford to fight them either. The truth of her words settled over them like a weight. Daniel thought about his savings account, barely enough to cover 3 months of expenses if work dried up. He thought about custody lawyers, about court fees, about the reality that people with money could weaponize the legal system against people without it. Daddy? Mila's small voice came from her bedroom doorway. Why are you yelling? Daniel's heart sank. How much had she heard? Hey, Butterfly, we're not yelling, we're just— You are yelling, Mila said, walking into the living room in her pajamas. And Lena's crying. What's wrong? Daniel looked at Lena helplessly, not knowing how to explain the situation to a 6-year-old, but Lena knelt down in front of Mila, taking the child's hands gently. Some people think I might not be a good person to be friends with you and your daddy, Lena said quietly. They're worried that I might cause problems for you. That's silly, Mila said with certainty. You're nice. I am nice, but I also have some problems in my life that make other people nervous. And because those people care about you very much, they want your daddy to stop being friends with me. Who are these people? Daniel exchanged glances with Lena, then knelt down next to her. Grandma Catherine and Grandpa Robert, he said gently. They're worried about you. Mila's face scrunched up in confusion. But they never visit. Why do they care now? They've always cared, Daniel said, though the words felt hollow. They just show it in complicated ways. I don't want Lena to leave, Mila said, her voice getting louder. She's our friend. She paints with me, and she tells good stories, and she gives the best hugs, and she's not scary at all. I know, sweetheart, Lena said, tears streaming down her face now. But sometimes being friends with someone causes more problems than it solves. And I don't want to cause problems for you and your daddy. Then don't leave, Mila said simply. If you leave, that's the problem. Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought. His daughter had cut through all the complexity and arrived at the simplest truth. The problem wasn't Lena's presence. The problem was other people's fear and prejudice and willingness to use a vulnerable woman as a weapon. Mila's right, Daniel said, standing up. You're not leaving. We're going to figure this out together. Daniel, no, listen to me. He took Lena's hands, holding them firmly. I spent 18 months being controlled by fear. Fear that I wasn't good enough as a parent. Fear that I'd screw up Mila's life. Fear that opening myself up to anything new would just lead to more pain. And you know what? I'm done with fear. I'm done letting other people's opinions dictate my choices. But they're Mila's grandparents. They have rights. They have the right to be part of Mila's life. They don't have the right to control mine or to terrorize someone I care about. Daniel's voice was fierce now. And if they want to fight, they can have one. But I'm not abandoning you, not because of threats or investigations or implications about what kind of father I am. You can't risk losing Mila, Lena protested. I won't lose Mila, because I haven't done anything wrong, and neither have you. And if we let them bully us into ending this friendship, what message does that send to my daughter? That we cave to pressure? That we abandon people when things get difficult? That fear is more important than loyalty? Lena was crying openly now, but there was something like hope in her expression. You really mean that? Every word. Mila climbed into Lena's lap, wrapping her small arms around the woman's neck. Don't be sad, she whispered. We're going to fix this. Daddy said so, and he always keeps his promises. Daniel pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. His sister, Elena, who was a paralegal and would know what their options were. But before he could call, his phone rang again. Same unknown number from earlier. He answered with steel in his voice. What do you want? Mr. Brooks. Richard Montgomery sounded less smug now, more businesslike. I'd like to arrange a meeting between you and Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery. Today, if possible. There are concerns that need to be addressed regarding your daughter's welfare. I'll meet with them, Daniel said. But on my terms. And Lena will be there too. I don't think that's... Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. Daniel glanced at Lena, who was shaking her head frantically, but he ignored her. Today at 2 o'clock, Sullivan's Cafe. If they want to discuss my parenting or my friendships or anything else, they can say it to my face instead of hiding behind hired investigators. There was a long pause. I'll convey your message, Montgomery said stiffly, and hung up. Daniel set his phone down and looked at Lena and Mila, both watching him with wide eyes. Okay, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to call Elena and get legal advice. Then we're going to meet with Sarah's parents and set some boundaries. And then we're going to move forward with our lives without looking over our shoulders wondering when the next threat is coming. What if they take Mila away? Lena whispered. They won't. Because I'm a good father, and they have no legal grounds to challenge custody. Daniel hoped that was true. And because I'm going to make it very clear that their behavior is unacceptable. I'm scared, Lena admitted. Me too, Daniel said honestly. But I'm more angry than scared, and sometimes anger is useful. Mila looked between them seriously. Are we having an adventure? Despite everything, Daniel laughed. Yeah, Butterfly, I guess we are. Good, Mila said with satisfaction. I like adventures, especially ones where we all stay together at the end. Daniel met Lena's eyes over his daughter's head, and he saw the same determination he felt mirrored in her expression. This was it, the moment where they either fought for this fragile connection they'd built, or let fear and outside pressure tear it apart before it had a chance to become something real. We stay together, Daniel promised, to both of them. No matter what happens today, we face it together. Agreed? Agreed, Lena said, her voice stronger now. Agreed, Mila echoed, squeezing Lena tighter. And in that moment, in his small living room with morning light streaming through the windows, Daniel Brooks made a choice that would define everything that came after. He chose loyalty over fear, connection over isolation, and the messy, unpredictable reality of caring about people over the false safety of keeping everyone at arm's length. Whatever happened at Sullivan's Cafe that afternoon, whatever accusations or threats Sarah's parents brought with them, Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't facing it alone. And neither was Lena. They'd stumbled into each other's lives asking for simple human kindness, and somehow that had transformed into something bigger and more important than either of them had anticipated. A family, Mila had called them. And maybe she was right. Elena arrived at the apartment within 40 minutes of Daniel's call, her briefcase in one hand and a paper bag of pastries in the other. She was 3 years older than Daniel, with the same dark hair and sharp eyes, but where grief had made him quieter, life had made her fiercer. She took one look at her brother's face and set the pastries on the counter. "Tell me everything," she said. And Daniel did. He explained about meeting Lena, about the private investigator, about the phone call from Richard Montgomery, and the arranged meeting at Sullivan's Cafe. Elena listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. When Daniel finished, she turned to Lena, who'd been sitting silently on the couch with Mila curled against her side. "Do you have any criminal history?" Elena asked bluntly. "Any restraining orders? Any history of violence or substance abuse?" "No," Lena said quietly. "Nothing like that. Mental health treatment. I saw a therapist for a few months after the accident, for depression and PTSD, but I couldn't afford to keep going once my insurance ran out. That's not a legal problem. That's actually in your favor. Shows you sought help when you needed it." Elena pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "What about the medical debt? Any lawsuits or wage garnishments?" "I'm on payment plans for most of it. I've never missed a payment, even when it meant choosing between medicine and food." Lena's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "I'm not a deadbeat. I'm just poor. Being poor isn't a crime, and it's not grounds for keeping you away from Daniel or Mila." Elena tapped her pen against the pad. "Here's the reality. Robert and Catherine Montgomery have no legal standing to dictate who Daniel spends time with or who's around Mila, unless they can prove actual harm or danger. And from what you've told me, there is no harm or danger." "But they have money," Daniel said. "They could tie this up in court for months, make my life hell." "They could try," Elena interrupted, "but I know family law, and I know judges. A custody challenge based solely on my son-in-law has a female friend I don't approve of isn't going anywhere, especially when that friend has a clean record and the father is clearly competent and loving." "What about the private investigator?" Lena asked. "What if he found something, twisted something? Then we'll deal with it. But Lena, here's what I need you to understand." Elena's voice gentled. "People like the Montgomerys rely on intimidation. They throw money at problems and expect people to cave out of fear. But if you stand your ground and call their bluff, they usually fold. Because deep down, they know they don't have a real case." "You think they're bluffing?" Daniel said hopefully. "I think they're scared. Their son-in-law is moving on with his life, building new connections, and they're worried about losing relevance in their granddaughter's life. So they're lashing out." Elena looked at Mila, who was listening with wide, serious eyes. "But here's what matters. Is Mila safe? Is she happy? Is she cared for?" "Yes," Mila said firmly before anyone else could answer. "Daddy takes very good care of me. And Lena is nice. She's not scary at all." "There you go," Elena said with satisfaction. "The opinion of the actual child in question, that carries weight." They spent the next hour preparing for the meeting. Elena coached Daniel on what to say and what not to say, reminded him to stay calm no matter how much the Montgomerys tried to provoke him, and made it clear that any threats they made needed to be documented. She wanted to come to the meeting herself, but Daniel refused. "This needs to be personal," he said, "not legal. I need them to see that I'm not afraid of them, and that I'm making decisions as Mila's father, not because a lawyer told me to." "Fine, but I'm sitting at a different table in the cafe, close enough to intervene if things go sideways." Elena looked at Lena. "And you? Are you sure you want to be there? This could get ugly." "I'm sure," Lena said, though her voice trembled. If they're going to talk about me, I deserve to be in the room. Fair enough. Elena packed up her briefcase and hugged her brother tightly. You're doing the right thing, Danny. Standing up for what matters. I hope so. After Elena left, Daniel helped Mila get dressed and tried to eat something, though his stomach was in knots. Lena sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands, and Daniel could see her spiraling into anxiety. Hey, he said, sitting next to her. Look at me. She raised her eyes reluctantly. Whatever they say today, whatever accusations they make, none of it changes who you are or what you mean to us. Daniel took her hand. You're not on trial here. They are. Because they're the ones who hired someone to stalk you, who threatened me on the phone, who tried to use fear as a weapon. That's not love, that's control, and I won't let them get away with it. What if I make things worse by being there? You won't. You'll make things better by showing them that you're a real person, not some imaginary threat they've built up in their minds. Daniel squeezed her hand. And you'll show them that we stand together, that their intimidation tactics don't work. Lena nodded, but Daniel could see she was barely holding it together. He wished he could promise her that everything would be fine, that the meeting would go smoothly and the Montgomerys would apologize and back off. But he'd learned that life didn't come with those kinds of guarantees. They arrived at Sullivan's Cafe 15 minutes early. Elena was already there, sitting at a corner table with a laptop open as if she just happened to be working. Daniel, Lena, and Mila took a booth near the window, and Daniel ordered coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for Mila, who was uncharacteristically quiet. You okay, Butterfly? Daniel asked. I don't want Grandma and Grandpa to be mean to Lena, Mila said in a small voice. They're not going to be mean. We're just going to have a conversation. But they made Lena cry. That's mean. You're right. It was mean. And I'm going to tell them that. At exactly 2 o'clock, Robert and Catherine Montgomery walked through the cafe door. They were in their mid-60s, dressed in expensive casual clothes that somehow made everyone else in the room look shabby. Robert was tall and silver-haired, with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Catherine was elegant and cold, her face arranged in an expression of perpetual disapproval. They spotted Daniel immediately and walked over, their eyes flicking to Lena with barely concealed distaste before landing on Mila with forced warmth. Hello, Mila, dear, Catherine said, bending down. How's my beautiful granddaughter? Hi, Grandma, Mila said politely, but she didn't move from her position pressed against Lena's side. Catherine's smile tightened. Daniel, I see you've brought your friend. Lena Hale, Daniel said evenly. Since you've apparently spent a lot of money investigating her, I thought you should meet her properly. This is inappropriate, Robert said, ignoring Lena entirely. We asked for a private meeting, and I said Lena would be here. This concerns her, so she has a right to participate. Daniel gestured to the booth. Sit down or don't. But if you want to talk, this is how it's happening. The Montgomerys exchanged glances, clearly not used to being dictated to. Finally, they slid into the booth across from Daniel, Lena, and Mila. The tension was thick enough to cut. Let me be direct, Robert said, his voice low and controlled. We're concerned about the choices you're making, Daniel. Specifically, your decision to involve this woman in Mila's life. Her name is Lena, Daniel said, and she's not involved in Mila's life. She's our friend. A friend you met 3 weeks ago, Catherine interjected. A friend with substantial financial problems, no stable housing, and a documented history of mental health issues. How do you know any of that? Lena asked quietly. You hired someone to follow me, to take pictures of me, to dig into my private medical records. We have every right to protect our granddaughter, Catherine said coldly. And when we noticed Daniel was spending time with a stranger, we felt obligated to investigate. You felt obligated to violate my privacy, Lena corrected, her voice stronger now. You felt obligated to make assumptions about who I am based on my worst circumstances. We're making assumptions based on facts, Robert said. The fact that you're financially unstable, the fact that you were treated for depression, the fact that you approached Daniel outside a cafe, a married man with a young daughter, and initiated contact under questionable circumstances. I was a widower when we met, Daniel said sharply. Not that it's any of your business. Everything involving Mila is our business, Catherine said. She's our connection to Sarah. She's all we have left of our daughter. And you think harassing someone I care about is how you honor Sarah's memory? Daniel's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. You think Sarah would approve of you hiring investigators and making threats and trying to tear apart something good because you can't control it? Don't you dare speak for our daughter, Robert said, his face reddening. You have no idea what Sarah would want. I was married to her for 8 years. I think I have some idea. Daniel leaned forward. And I know she'd be disgusted by what you're doing right now. She believed in kindness and giving people second chances and not judging others by their circumstances. Everything you're doing goes against what she stood for. Mila needs stability, Catherine said, ignoring his words. She needs consistency and appropriate role models, not a woman who's clearly struggling with basic life functions. Stop! Mila's voice cut through the adult conversation like a knife. Everyone turned to look at her, and Daniel was shocked to see tears streaming down his daughter's face. Stop being mean to Lena. Sweetheart, we're not being mean, Catherine started, but Mila interrupted. Yes, you are. You're saying she's bad and she's not. She's nice and she makes me laugh, and she teaches me about art, and she gives good hugs, and she's our friend. Mila's voice was getting louder, attracting attention from other tables. And you never visit me anyway, so you don't get to decide who my friends are. Mila, Robert tried, but the little girl wasn't done. You didn't come to my birthday. You didn't come to my art show. You didn't come when Daddy was really sad and needed help. Mila's words were devastating in their simplicity. But Lena came. Lena wanted to be here, so she gets to stay and you don't get to make her leave. The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine looked stricken. Robert's face had gone from red to pale, and even Elena had looked up from her laptop with barely concealed satisfaction. But it was Lena's expression that caught Daniel's heart. She was crying again, but this time with something that looked like joy mixed with the pain. Out of the mouths of babes, Elena called from her table, not bothering to pretend she wasn't listening. Catherine recovered first, her voice icy. This is exactly what we're talking about. Mila is clearly being influenced to turn against her own family. She's not being influenced, Daniel said. She's being honest, and if you can't hear what she's trying to tell you, then you're more interested in control than in actually being part of her life. We love Mila, Robert said, and for the first time, Daniel heard genuine emotion in his voice. We're terrified of losing her the way we lost Sarah. We're terrified of something happening to her because we didn't act. I understand that, Daniel said, his anger cooling slightly. I do, but Lena isn't a threat. She's someone who's been through hell and came out the other side still capable of kindness. She treats Mila with gentleness and respect. She makes our home feel warmer. And yes, she has problems. We all have problems. But that doesn't make her dangerous. How can you be sure? Catherine pressed. How can you know she won't have a breakdown or disappear or cause some kind of trauma for Mila? I can't be sure, Daniel admitted. There are no guarantees in life. I couldn't guarantee Sarah wouldn't die suddenly and leave us. I can't guarantee I won't get sick or lose my job or screw up as a parent in 1,000 different ways. But I can make choices based on what I see in front of me. And what I see is someone genuine and caring who's become important to both of us. Lena had been silent during this exchange, but now she spoke, her voice trembling but clear. I understand why you're scared. If I were in your position, I'd probably do the same thing. But I need you to understand something. She looked directly at Catherine. I'm not trying to replace Sarah. I could never replace Sarah. I'm just trying to be a friend to Daniel and Mila. That's all. I don't have ulterior motives or schemes. I'm just a person who was desperately lonely and found unexpected kindness, and I'm trying to give that kindness back. Pretty words, Robert said skeptically, but actions matter more. Then judge me by my actions, Lena said. I've been nothing but respectful to Mila. I've encouraged her relationship with you. Daniel told me you exist, and I've never said anything negative about you. I've never asked Daniel for money or tried to move in permanently or pushed for more than what's been offered freely. I'm just being present, that's all. Catherine studied Lena with calculating eyes, and Daniel could see her trying to find fault, trying to uncover some hidden agenda. But there was nothing to find. Lena was exactly what she appeared to be, a person trying to rebuild a life that had been torn apart. I want to propose something, Daniel said before either Montgomery could respond. You want to be more involved in Mila's life? Fine. We'll set up regular visits. Every other Saturday, you can take her for the afternoon, do something fun together, build memories, be grandparents. But in exchange, you stop the investigation, you stop the threats, and you treat Lena with basic human respect. That's not a negotiation, Robert said stiffly. Yes, it is. Because right now you have no legal leg to stand on, and any attempt to challenge my custody would fail spectacularly. My sister Elena, who's a paralegal, has already confirmed that. Daniel nodded toward Elena's table. So you can either accept my offer and be part of Mila's life on healthy terms, or you can continue with the threats and intimidation and find yourselves increasingly shut out. Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. You can't dictate. Yes, I can. I'm Mila's father. I get to decide who's in her life and under what conditions. Daniel's voice was firm, but not cruel. Look, I don't want to keep Mila from you. She deserves to know her grandparents, but not at the cost of having good people harassed and investigated. Not at the cost of teaching her that love comes with conditions and threats. What if she does something? Catherine asked, gesturing toward Lena. What if she hurts Mila somehow? Then I'll handle it, because that's my job as her father. But you don't get to preemptively punish someone for crimes they haven't committed. Daniel reached over and took Lena's hand, a public declaration of solidarity. She's in our lives. That's not changing. You can either accept it and maintain a relationship with Mila, or you can keep fighting and lose that relationship entirely. Your choice. The Montgomerys looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Robert sighed heavily. Every other Saturday. Yes. And you'll call if there are any problems, school issues, health concerns, anything significant. I'll call to keep you informed, not to ask permission, but to include you. And her? Catherine nodded toward Lena with barely concealed distaste. You don't have to like her, Daniel said, but you do have to be civil. No more investigations, no more threats, no more contacting her employer or landlord or trying to sabotage her life. She's off limits. Fine, Catherine said, though the word clearly tasted bitter. Robert pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking quietly to someone, probably Richard Montgomery, giving instructions to end the investigation. When he hung up, he looked at Daniel with something that might have been grudging respect. You've changed since Sarah died. You're more assertive. I had to be. I had to. For Mila's sake. Daniel glanced at his daughter, who was watching the adults with worried eyes. And for my own. We'll see you Saturday after next then, Catherine said, standing up. She looked at Mila. Would you like that, dear? Spending time with Grandma and Grandpa? Mila looked at Daniel, seeking permission, and he nodded. Okay, she said cautiously. But you have to be nice. We'll be nice, Robert promised, and he actually smiled slightly. We'll take you to that new children's museum you've been wanting to visit. After the Montgomerys left, the tension in the booth released like a popped balloon. Lena let out a shaky breath and covered her face with her hands. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and Mila climbed into her lap, hugging her fiercely. You did so good, Daniel murmured. You were so brave. I thought I was going to throw up, Lena admitted, her voice muffled. When Catherine was talking about my medical records, I wanted to disappear. But you didn't. You stood your ground. Elena came over to their booth, grinning broadly. That was beautiful, especially the part where Mila called them out for never visiting. That was the nail in their coffin. I was just telling the truth, Mila said seriously. Miss Rebecca says truth is important. Miss Rebecca is very wise. Elena ruffled her niece's hair. You guys want to get out of here? Go somewhere less tense? They ended up at the park a few blocks away, letting Mila burn off nervous energy on the playground while the adults sat on a bench watching her. Elena had to leave for another appointment, but before she went, she pulled Daniel aside. You did good today, little brother, she said. Sarah would be proud of you. You think so? I know so. You protected someone vulnerable. You stood up for what was right, and you didn't let bullies win. That's exactly what she would have done. Elena glanced at Lena, who was pushing Mila on the swing. And for what it's worth, I like her. She's genuine. And the way she is with Mila, that's not something you can fake. After Elena left, Daniel joined Lena at the swings. They stood side by side, watching Mila pump her legs to go higher, her laughter carrying across the playground. "Thank you," Lena said quietly, "for fighting for me, for not backing down when they threatened you. You don't need to thank me for treating you like a human being. Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have decided I was too much trouble." Lena turned to look at him, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I keep waiting to wake up and discover this was all a dream, that someone like you doesn't actually exist. I'm not that special. I'm just a guy who happened to say yes when you asked for a hug." "You're more than that." Lena's voice was fierce now. "You're someone who sees people, really sees them. Not just what they can offer you or how they make you look, but who they actually are underneath all the damage and fear. That's rare, Daniel. That's special." Daniel felt his face heat, uncomfortable with the praise, but also moved by it. "Well, you make it easy, because underneath all your damage and fear, you're pretty remarkable yourself." They smiled at each other, and for a moment Daniel felt something shift between them. Not necessarily romantic, though he couldn't deny the attraction that was starting to develop, but something deeper. A recognition that they'd found something important in each other, something worth protecting and nurturing. "Higher, Daddy," Mila called from the swing, and Daniel moved to give her a push, laughing as she shrieked with delight. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the park, playing on equipment and feeding ducks at the pond and eating ice cream from a vendor despite the cool weather. By the time they headed home, Mila was tired and happy, chattering about her day with the unfiltered enthusiasm of childhood. That evening, after Mila was in bed, Daniel and Lena sat on the couch with cups of tea, processing everything that had happened. The meeting with the Montgomerys felt both victorious and exhausting, and Daniel could see the toll it had taken on Lena. "Are you really okay?" he asked gently. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me is relieved, like I can finally breathe without worrying about being watched or investigated. But part of me is still scared. What if they change their minds? What if they find a way to make trouble anyway? Then we'll deal with it, together." Daniel set down his tea and turned to face her fully. "But, Lena, I need you to understand something. You're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. I'm here. Mila's here. Elena's here. We're your people now if you want us to be." "I want that more than anything," Lena whispered, "but I'm terrified of losing it, of doing something wrong and having it all taken away again." "That's not going to happen, because you're not going to do anything wrong. You're going to keep being exactly who you are, honest and kind and doing your best despite impossible circumstances. And that's enough. That's more than enough." Lena leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder, and Daniel wrapped his arm around her. They sat like that for a long time, two broken people finding comfort in each other's presence, and Daniel thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how connection could come from the most unexpected places, how saying yes to one desperate request could lead to this, sitting in his living room with a woman who'd become essential to his life in a matter of weeks, feeling more hopeful about the future than he had since Sarah died. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "The Montgomerys' lawyer just called me. Investigation is officially closed. All documentation will be destroyed. You scared them, little brother." "Well done." Daniel showed the text to Lena, and he watched relief flood her features. "It's really over?" she asked. "It's really over." What happens now? Daniel thought about the question. What did happen now? They'd faced the immediate crisis and won, but that was just the beginning. Now came the harder work of figuring out what this relationship was, what it could become, whether friendship was enough, or if they were building toward something more. "Now," he said slowly, "we take it one day at a time. We keep building this thing we've started. We let Mila keep painting with you and teaching you about her stuffed animals' elaborate backstories. We have Saturday afternoon coffee and talk about nothing important. We be there for each other when things are hard. And we see where it goes." "That sounds nice," Lena said softly. "That sounds really nice." "There's just one thing," Daniel added, and he felt her tense slightly. "You can't keep living at the Riverside extended stay. It's not safe, and it's not sustainable." "Daniel, I can't afford anything else." "I know, which is why I'm going to help you find something better. Not because you're a charity case," he added quickly, seeing her about to protest, but because I care about you and I have resources to help, and it would make me feel better knowing you were somewhere decent." "I can't accept that," Lena said, pulling away from him. "I can't let you pay for my housing. That's too much." "Then don't think of it as me paying for you. Think of it as me investing in someone who's become important to my daughter and to me. Think of it as paying forward the kindness someone once showed me when I needed it." Daniel caught her hand. "Please, let me help. Not because you're weak or incapable, but because sometimes accepting help is the strongest thing you can do." Lena's eyes filled with tears again. She cried so easily, and Daniel wondered how long she'd been holding everything in before they met. "Why are you so good to me?" she whispered. "Because you deserve goodness. And because making you happy makes me happy. And because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a stranger and became family." "Family," Lena repeated, testing the word. "Mila said that the first day I met her, I thought she was just being a kid, not understanding what the word meant. But now it feels true," Daniel finished. "Yeah, it does." They sat together until late into the night, talking about possibilities and plans, about fears and hopes, about the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. And when Lena finally went to sleep on the pull-out couch, because Daniel had insisted she stay another night rather than return to the extended stay, Daniel stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, and feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt lucky. Not in spite of the pain he'd endured, but because of how it had shaped him into someone capable of recognizing another person's pain and choosing to meet it with compassion rather than fear. He felt grateful for the randomness that had put him at that cafe on that particular afternoon, for Lena's desperate courage in asking a stranger for help, for his own willingness to say yes despite every instinct telling him to protect himself. And most of all, he felt hopeful, because tomorrow would come, and the day after that, and the day after that, and Lena would be part of those days. She'd be there for breakfast and for Mila's endless questions and for the quiet moments in between. She'd be there when things were hard and when things were good. She'd be there, period. And that simple fact felt like the most precious gift Daniel had received since losing Sarah. In the living room, Lena stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Daniel smiled and finally went to bed, knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they'd face them together. The widowed father, his perceptive daughter, and the broken woman who'd asked for a hug and ended up becoming family. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation with the Montgomerys, and Daniel had kept his word about helping Lena find better housing. It took days of searching through listings, making phone calls, and negotiating with landlords who saw Lena's financial situation and immediately lost interest. But eventually, they found a small studio apartment in a neighborhood that wasn't fancy but was safe. A ground floor unit with actual windows that let in natural light and a kitchen that consisted of more than just a hot plate. The day Lena moved in, Daniel and Mila helped her carry the few belongings she owned up from the Riverside extended stay. It didn't take long. Everything Lena owned fit into 4 cardboard boxes and 2 garbage bags. Standing in the empty studio with her meager possessions scattered across the floor, Daniel felt his heart break a little at how thoroughly her life had been stripped down to bare essentials. "It's perfect," Lena said, and she wasn't being sarcastic. Her eyes were shining as she looked around the space. "It has a real stove, and a bathroom door that actually locks, and neighbors who aren't screaming at each other at 3 in the morning. "We should paint it," Mila announced, walking around the perimeter with the critical eye of an artist. "It's too white. White is boring." "Mila, we can't just paint someone else's apartment," Daniel started, but Lena interrupted. "Actually, the landlord said I could paint if I wanted to, as long as it's not anything too wild." She looked at Mila with a smile. "What color do you think?" "Yellow," Mila said immediately. "Like sunshine, because this is your sunshine place." And that's how Daniel found himself spending his Saturday afternoon painting a studio apartment pale yellow while his daughter supervised, and Lena laughed more freely than he'd ever heard. They made a mess of it, paint on their clothes, on their hands, on Mila's nose where she'd somehow managed to smudge it. But by evening, the apartment glowed warm and welcoming, and when Lena stood in the center of her new home looking around with wonder, Daniel knew they'd done something important. "Thank you," she said for the 100th time. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this." "You don't repay gifts," Daniel said firmly. You accept them and pay them forward when you can. The Montgomerys had taken Mila for their first official visit the previous Saturday, and to Daniel's surprise, it had gone well. They'd taken her to the Children's Museum as promised, then for ice cream, and returned her with a new set of art supplies and stories about all the exhibits they'd seen. Mila reported that Grandma and Grandpa had been much nicer than before, and hadn't said anything mean about anybody. It wasn't perfect. Catherine's goodbye had been stiff, and Robert still looked at Daniel with barely concealed disapproval. But it was progress. And more importantly, Mila seemed genuinely happy about spending time with her grandparents, which was what mattered. But despite these positive developments, Daniel could sense something shifting in Lena. She was quieter than usual, more withdrawn. She still came over for dinner twice a week, still painted with Mila on Saturday afternoons, still texted Daniel throughout the day with random observations and questions. But there was a distance growing, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. Finally, on a Tuesday evening after Mila was in bed, Daniel confronted her about it. They were sitting on his couch watching a documentary. Neither of them was really paying attention to, and Lena was curled into the corner with her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. "What's going on?" Daniel asked, muting the television. "What do you mean?" "You're pulling away. I can feel it." Daniel turned to face her fully. "Did something happen? Did I do something?" "No," Lena said quickly. "You've been nothing but wonderful. That's actually the problem." "I don't understand." Lena took a shaky breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Daniel, and it's terrifying because I know I shouldn't be. I know you're not ready. I know you're still grieving Sarah. I know I'm just this broken person you took pity on, and turning that into something romantic would be a disaster. But I can't help how I feel, and it's getting harder to pretend I don't feel it." The confession hung in the air between them, and Daniel's mind went blank. He'd known, on some level, that something was developing between them. He'd felt the pull of attraction, the way his heart rate picked up when she smiled, the way he looked forward to seeing her with an intensity that went beyond friendship. But he'd been carefully not examining those feelings, convincing himself it was too soon, too complicated, too risky. "Say something," Lena whispered, and her voice was breaking. "Please." "I don't know what to say," Daniel admitted. "Because I feel it too, and I've been terrified to acknowledge it because what if I'm just lonely? What if I'm confusing gratitude with something deeper? What if I'm not ready and I hurt you by pretending I am?" "So where does that leave us?" Lena asked. "I don't know." Daniel ran his hands through his hair, frustrated with his own uncertainty. "I know I care about you. I know you've become essential to my life and Mila's life. I know that thinking about you not being here makes my chest hurt. But I also know I'm still working through grief and guilt and all these complicated feelings about moving on from Sarah." "Then maybe I should take a step back," Lena said quietly. "Give you space to figure things out without the pressure of say, no." The word came out sharper than Daniel intended. "No, that's not what I want. I don't want space. I don't want distance. I want—" He stopped, trying to articulate something he barely understood himself. "I want to be honest about what's happening between us. I want to stop pretending it's just friendship when it's becoming more than that. But I also want to be careful, for Mila's sake, for your sake, for my own sake." "So what does that mean practically?" Daniel thought about it. "It means we keep doing what we're doing, but we're honest about the fact that it might be leading somewhere. It means we take things slow and communicate and don't make promises we're not sure we can keep. It means—" He reached out and took her hand. "It means I need time, but I don't need you to disappear while I figure things out." Lena squeezed his hand and some of the tension left her shoulders. "I can do slow. I'm good at slow." "Are you?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Because you asked a stranger for a hug within 30 seconds of meeting him. That's not exactly slow." "That was different." "That was desperation, not romance." Lena smiled back, and the heaviness in the room lifted slightly. "But you're right. I should probably work on my pacing." They sat together for a while longer, hands intertwined, not talking, but not needing to. And when Lena finally left for her new apartment around 10 o'clock, Daniel walked her down to her car and found himself pulling her into a hug that lasted longer than friendship strictly required. "Good night," she murmured against his chest. "Good night." Daniel pressed a kiss to the top of her head without thinking, then froze, realizing what he'd done. But Lena just hugged him tighter, and Daniel decided that maybe slow didn't mean avoiding every impulse. Maybe it just meant being thoughtful about which ones to follow. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Lena came for dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays, spent Saturday afternoons painting with Mila, and occasionally stayed over when it got late and she was too tired to drive home. Daniel found himself texting her constantly, sending her articles he thought she'd find interesting, asking her opinion on work decisions, sharing photos of Mila's latest artistic creations. They went on what could only be called dates, though neither of them used that word. Dinner at the Italian place downtown while Elena watched Mila. A Sunday afternoon at the Botanical Gardens. A late-night trip to the diner after Lena's convenience store shift, when she texted that she'd had a rough night and needed company. And slowly, carefully, they started building something that felt real and sustainable. Daniel talked to Mila about how sometimes adults who were friends could become something more than friends, and his daughter had looked at him with knowing eyes and said, "Like how you and Lena look at each other during movies? How do we look at each other? Like you both want to hold hands, but you're being silly about it." Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought, not for the first time. It was Elena who finally pushed things forward. She came over one evening in November, bringing wine and the blunt honesty only siblings could get away with. After Mila was in bed, she cornered Daniel in the kitchen. "When are you going to stop circling each other like nervous teenagers and actually acknowledge what everyone else can already see?" she demanded. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb. You're in love with Lena. She's in love with you. Mila adores her. Even the Montgomerys have backed off. So what's stopping you from actually moving forward?" Daniel stared into his wine glass. "Fear, I guess. Fear that I'm betraying Sarah's memory. Fear that I'm moving too fast or not fast enough. Fear that I'll mess this up and hurt everyone involved." "Danny," Elena's voice softened. "Sarah would want you to be happy. She'd want Mila to have someone who loves her, and she'd probably really like Lena if she could meet her. But even if she wouldn't, you're allowed to move on. You're allowed to build a new life. That doesn't erase what you had with Sarah. It just means you're choosing to live instead of just surviving. I know that intellectually, but emotionally, you're going to feel guilty no matter what. That's normal. That's grief. But you can't let guilt stop you from choosing happiness when it's right in front of you." Elena set down her wine and took his hand. "That woman is good for you. She's good for Mila. And more than that, you're good for her. You've given her a reason to believe she's worth loving. Don't waste that." Daniel thought about his sister's words for days afterward. And finally, on a Saturday afternoon in early December while Mila was at art class, he asked Lena to meet him at Sullivan's Cafe, the place where it had all started. She arrived looking nervous, and Daniel realized she probably thought something was wrong. He quickly gestured for her to sit, ordering them both coffee before he lost his nerve. "I've been thinking a lot," he started once they both had steaming mugs in front of them. "About us. About what this is and what it could be." "Okay," Lena said cautiously. "And I realized I've been making this harder than it needs to be. I've been so worried about doing the right thing that I've been paralyzed from doing anything at all." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "But the truth is simple. I care about you, more than care about you. I'm falling in love with you, Lena. Maybe I've been falling since that first day when you asked me for a hug. Maybe it took longer, but either way, I'm there. And I'm tired of pretending I'm not." Lena's eyes filled with tears, the good kind this time. "Really?" "Really. And I know it's complicated. I know we come with a lot of baggage. I know Mila is always going to be my first priority, and Sarah's memory is always going to be part of our lives. But if you're willing to navigate all that complexity with me, I'd like to stop calling this friendship and start calling it what it actually is." Which is? Love. The word felt both terrifying and liberating to say out loud. Messy, imperfect, built on broken pieces love, but real, and worth fighting for. Lena was crying openly now, and her smile was the most beautiful thing Daniel had ever seen. "I'm willing," she said. "I'm so willing. I've been willing since you said yes to a crazy woman asking for a hug." Daniel laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. "You weren't crazy. You were desperate. There's a difference. Still, you could have walked away. You could have kept walking at any point, but you didn't. Lena squeezed his hand. You stayed. Even when it got hard. Even when it would have been easier to leave, you stayed. So did you, Daniel pointed out. When the Montgomerys investigated you, when they threatened you, when any sane person would have run, you stayed. Because you're brave. And because you care about us as much as we care about you. They sat there smiling at each other like fools, and Daniel didn't care who was watching or what anyone thought. This was his life, his choice, his second chance at happiness, and he was going to take it. When Mila came home from art class, she immediately sensed something had changed. Did something happen? She asked, looking between the two adults suspiciously. Lena and I had a talk, Daniel said carefully, and we decided that we're more than just friends now. Like boyfriend and girlfriend? Mila asked. Something like that. Mila considered this information seriously. Then she walked over to Lena and took her hand. Are you going to leave like Mommy did? The question was a knife to Daniel's heart, but Lena handled it with grace. She knelt down to Mila's level and looked her straight in the eyes. Your mommy didn't want to leave, sweetie. She would have stayed forever if she could have. But I'm choosing to stay, and I'm going to keep choosing to stay every single day. I promise. Promises can break, Mila said with the wisdom of someone who'd learned that lesson young. You're right, they can, but I'm going to try my hardest to keep mine. Lena pulled Mila into a hug. I love you, Mila, and I love your daddy, and I want to be part of your family if you'll let me. Mila was quiet for a long moment, and Daniel held his breath. Then his daughter said, Okay, but you have to keep painting with me, and you have to teach me more about colors, and you have to give good hugs every day. I can do all of that, Lena promised. Then, okay. Mila pulled back and looked at her father. Can we have pizza to celebrate? We can definitely have pizza to celebrate. That night, after pizza and a movie and Mila's elaborate bedtime routine, Daniel and Lena stood on his balcony looking out at the city lights. It was cold enough that they could see their breath, and Lena was wrapped in one of Daniel's jackets that was too big for her. Are you scared? She asked quietly. Terrified, Daniel admitted, but also hopeful, which is a new feeling. Me too, Lena leaned against him. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for you to realize I'm too broken, for the Montgomerys to come back, for some disaster that proves I don't deserve this. Nothing's going to go wrong, Daniel said, though he knew that wasn't entirely true. Life would throw challenges at them. It always did. But they'd face those challenges together instead of alone, and that made all the difference. Or rather, things will go wrong because life is messy, but we'll handle it. Together. Together, Lena repeated, and the word sounded like a promise. They stood there until the cold drove them inside, and Daniel walked Lena to the door even though part of him wanted to ask her to stay. But they were taking things slow, being thoughtful, considering Mila's needs alongside their own. There would be time for next steps. Right now, this was enough. Good night, Lena said at the door, rising on her toes to kiss his cheek. Daniel turned his head at the last second, and the kiss landed on his lips instead, brief and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Good night, Daniel echoed. The months that followed weren't perfect. There were hard days when Daniel felt guilty about moving on, when Sarah's absence felt acute and painful. There were moments when Lena's insecurities flared up, when she convinced herself she didn't deserve happiness and tried to push everyone away. There were logistics to navigate, when to tell the Montgomerys about the relationship, how to explain to Mila what it meant when Lena started staying over more often, how to blend their lives without losing their individual identities. But there were also good days. There were Saturday mornings with pancakes and art projects. There were evenings curled up on the couch watching movies while Mila narrated alternative plots. There were quiet moments in the kitchen while cooking dinner, working in comfortable synchronicity. There were conversations that lasted until 2 a.m, covering everything from childhood dreams to current fears to hopes for the future. The Montgomerys, true to their word, maintained their every other Saturday visits with Mila, and while they were never warm toward Lena, they were civil. Catherine still made passive-aggressive comments occasionally, and Robert still looked at Daniel like he'd made questionable life choices. But they loved their granddaughter, and they could see that Mila was thriving, and eventually that had to be enough. 6 months after their first meeting, Lena moved out of her studio apartment and into Daniel's place. It was Mila's idea, actually. She'd asked one morning over breakfast why Lena had to leave every night when she was just going to come back the next day anyway. "That's not how it works, Butterfly," Daniel had explained. "Why not?" "We have the extra room. And Lena's here all the time anyway, and she makes you smile." Mila had looked at him with those knowing eyes. "Don't you want her to stay?" And the truth was, he did. He wanted to wake up with Lena there. He wanted to share the small domestic moments that made up a life. He wanted Mila to have the consistency of a two-parent household, even if it looked different from what most families had. When he proposed the idea to Lena, she'd cried. Happy tears mixed with disbelief. "Are you sure?" she kept asking. "Are you absolutely sure?" "I'm sure," Daniel had said. "Move in with us. Be part of this family officially. We want you here." So Lena packed up her studio apartment, which took longer than moving in had, since she'd accumulated more belongings in 6 months, and merged her life with theirs. She turned the spare room into a combination office and art studio, filling it with her painting supplies and Daniel's overflow of books, and Mila's endless creative projects. She added her mismatched dishes to Daniel's kitchen, her clothes to his closet, her presence to every corner of the apartment, and somehow, miraculously, it worked. The three of them found their rhythm, Daniel working from home during the day while Lena did her data entry, Mila coming home from school to both of them, dinner preparations that involved everyone contributing something, evenings spent together in varying combinations of alone time and family time. A year after that first hug outside Sullivan's Cafe, Daniel took Lena back to the same table on the same Saturday afternoon. Mila was with the Montgomerys, and it was just the two of them with coffee and the autumn air that felt exactly like that first day. "Remember this?" Daniel asked, gesturing around. "How could I forget? This is where my life changed." Lena smiled, but there was still wonder in her expression, as if she couldn't quite believe everything that had happened since. "I was so desperate that day, so convinced I'd disappeared completely, and then you said yes. Best decision I ever made. Even with all the complications, the Montgomerys, my medical debt, my depression, all of it? Especially with all of that, because you came with complications, but you also came with kindness and honesty and this incredible capacity for love despite everything you'd been through." Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "Which is why I wanted to bring you back here, to the place where it started." Lena's eyes went wide. "Daniel!" Let me say this before I lose my nerve. Daniel opened the box to reveal a simple ring, not expensive because they couldn't afford expensive, but beautiful in its simplicity. "I know we've only been together a year. I know by conventional standards that's fast. But we've already survived investigations and family drama and navigating grief and blending our lives. We've already proven we can handle the hard stuff together. So I don't want to wait anymore. I want to make this official. I want to promise you, in front of everyone who matters, that I'm choosing you every day for the rest of my life. Lena Hale, will you marry me?" Lena was crying. Of course she was crying, but she was also laughing and nodding and holding out her hand for him to slip the ring on. "Yes," she said through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." Daniel stood and pulled her into his arms, and they kissed there at the same table where a desperate woman had once asked a stranger for a hug, where unlikely friendship had turned into unexpected love, where two broken people had found a way to be whole together. "We should tell Mila," Lena said when they finally pulled apart. "She already knows," Daniel admitted. "I asked her first. She said, and I quote, 'Obviously you should marry Lena, then she'll be my mom for real.'" "For real," Lena repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." They picked up Mila from the Montgomerys' house together, and Daniel watched his daughter's face light up when she saw the ring on Lena's finger. Mila squealed and launched herself at Lena, hugging her with fierce joy. "You said yes," Mila shouted. "Of course I said yes," Lena said, hugging her back. "How could I say no to being part of this family officially?" Even Catherine Montgomery managed a tight smile at the sight of her granddaughter's happiness, and Robert shook Daniel's hand with something approaching warmth. "Congratulations," he said gruffly. "We hope you'll be very happy." It wasn't enthusiastic approval, but it was acceptance, and that was more than enough. The wedding was small, just family and close friends in Elena's backyard on a sunny afternoon in spring. Mila was the flower girl, taking her duties very seriously and ensuring that every petal was distributed with precision. Elena officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose. The Montgomerys sat in the front row, and while Catherine dabbed at her eyes during the ceremony, Daniel chose to believe they were happy tears. When it came time for vows, Daniel had written pages but ended up setting them aside and speaking from his heart. "Lena, you asked me for a hug, and I gave you that. But you've given me so much more. You've given me hope, companionship, love, and a future I'd stopped believing was possible. You've been a mother to Mila when she desperately needed one. You've been a partner to me when I'd convinced myself I'd never have that again. You've shown me that broken pieces can be put back together into something even more beautiful than the original. I promise to choose you every day, to see you when you feel invisible, to hold you when you need comfort, and to build a life with you that honors both where we've been and where we're going." Lena's vows were simpler, but no less powerful. "Daniel, when I asked you for a hug that day, I was asking for proof that I still existed, that I still mattered to someone. You gave me that and so much more. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me a daughter who teaches me daily what love looks like. You gave me a reason to believe I was worthy of good things. I promise to stay, even when things are hard. I promise to love Mila as fiercely as you do. I promise to keep choosing courage over fear, connection over isolation, and this family over everything else." When Elena pronounced them married, Mila cheered louder than anyone, and the small gathering erupted in applause. Daniel kissed his new wife, still strange to think of Lena that way, and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled since Sarah died. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of peace alongside it. The knowledge that he could hold both his love for his first wife and his love for his second wife, that honoring one didn't diminish the other. At the reception, Mila gave a speech that she'd written herself. She stood on a chair so everyone could see her and read from a piece of paper covered in her careful handwriting. "When Daddy and I first met Lena, I knew she was special. She was sad, but she was also nice. And Daddy says that being nice when you're sad is the hardest thing to do. So that means Lena is very brave. She taught me about painting and colors and giving good hugs. She makes Daddy laugh when he's worried. She makes our house feel warm. And now she's going to be my mom, which is the best thing ever because I always wanted a mom, and now I have one again. So thank you, Lena, for asking Daddy for a hug that day, because that hug turned into our family." There wasn't a dry eye in the backyard after that, and Daniel saw even Robert Montgomery wiping at his face discreetly. Lena pulled Mila into her arms and held her tight, whispering something in her ear that made Mila nod seriously. Later, when the party was winding down and guests were beginning to leave, Daniel found himself alone for a moment on Elena's back porch. He looked up at the darkening sky, at the first stars beginning to appear, and he thought about Sarah, about how much he'd loved her, how much he still missed her, how she'd shaped him into the person he was. But he also thought about how she'd want him to be happy, how she'd probably really like Lena if she could meet her, how she'd be proud of the father he'd become and the family he'd built. "I hope you approve," he whispered to the evening air, to the memory of his first wife, to the universe that had taken her too soon, but had also brought Lena into his life at exactly the right moment. "I hope you understand that this doesn't erase what we had. It just means I was brave enough to try again." A hand slipped into his, Lena, coming to stand beside him. "Talking to her?" she asked gently. "Yeah. Saying thank you, I think, for teaching me what love looked like so I could recognize it again when I found it with you." "That's beautiful." Lena leaned against him. "I like to think she's happy for us, for all of us." "Me too." They stood there watching the stars emerge, and Daniel thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from desperation to hope, from loneliness to connection, from two broken people to a family of three. It hadn't been easy, it hadn't been simple, but it had been real, and it had been worth it. Inside, he could hear Mila laughing at something Elena had said. His daughter's joy was pure and uncomplicated, the sound of a child who felt safe and loved and confident in her place in the world. That was what mattered most, not the perfect fairy tale ending, but the messy, beautiful reality of people choosing to love each other despite their wounds, their fears, their complicated histories. "Ready to go home?" Lena asked, squeezing his hand. "Yeah," Daniel said, and the word carried more meaning than just leaving a party. Home wasn't just a place anymore. It was the three of them together, wherever that might be. "Let's go home." They gathered up Mila, said their goodbyes, and drove back to the apartment that was now officially theirs together. Mila fell asleep in the car, exhausted from the excitement of the day, and Daniel carried her inside while Lena unlocked the door. They tucked her into bed together, Lena adjusting the stuffed animals while Daniel pulled up the covers, and they stood for a moment watching her sleep. "We did good today," Lena whispered. "We did," Daniel agreed. In their own bedroom later, as they got ready for bed in the comfortable routine they'd developed, Daniel felt a contentment he hadn't known was possible after loss. He'd thought his capacity for happiness had died with Sarah, that he'd spend the rest of his life just going through motions. But Lena had proven him wrong. She'd shown him that healing didn't mean forgetting, that moving forward wasn't betrayal, that love could be found again if you were brave enough to accept it when it appeared. "What are you thinking about?" Lena asked, catching his expression in the mirror. "Just about how one moment can change everything. How saying yes to one desperate request led to all of this." Daniel turned to face her. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask, for not walking away when things got hard, for choosing us every single day." "Thank you for saying yes," Lena replied, "for seeing me when I felt invisible, for fighting for me when others tried to tear us apart, for giving me a family when I thought I'd lost the right to have one." They climbed into bed, and Lena curled against Daniel's side in the way that had become second nature. In the darkness, with his wife, breathing softly beside him and his daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall, Daniel Brooks allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Complete. Not because everything was perfect, not because there wouldn't be challenges ahead, not because grief had magically disappeared or complications had been erased, but because he'd found people worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth choosing every single day. He'd found a woman whose brokenness matched his own, and together they'd built something stronger than either of them could have created alone. He'd given his daughter a mother who chose to love her, not out of obligation but out of genuine affection. He'd created a family that honored the past while embracing the future. And it had all started with a simple question: can I have a hug? 4 words from a stranger that had changed 3 lives forever. 4 words that had taken courage to speak and courage to answer. 4 words that had proven what Daniel now knew with absolute certainty: that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is say yes when someone does. Outside, the city hummed with its nighttime rhythms. Somewhere, other people were facing their own moments of choice, their own opportunities to reach out or turn away, to risk connection or retreat into safety. Daniel hoped they chose connection. He hoped they found the courage to say yes when unexpected chances for love appeared, because he knew now, with the certainty of experience, that those moments were precious gifts, rare and transformative. Lena's breathing deepened into sleep, and Daniel pressed a kiss to her forehead before closing his own eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. Tomorrow, they'd wake up as a married couple, navigate the new normal of their blended family, continue building a life together one day at a time. But tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. 3 people who'd found each other when they needed it most. 3 people who'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. 3 people who proved that family wasn't always about blood or convention, but about commitment and love and the daily decision to show up for each other. A widowed father, his perceptive daughter, and the woman who'd asked for a hug and ended up giving them everything they didn't know they needed. Together, imperfect and beautiful, healing and whole, choosing each other over and over again. And in the quiet of that spring night, as Daniel drifted off to sleep with his family safe around him, he felt Sarah's presence one last time, not haunting, but blessing, not holding him back, but releasing him forward. And he knew, with peaceful certainty, that he'd honored her memory in the best possible way, by learning to love again, by opening his heart, when every instinct told him to protect it, by proving that endings could become beginnings if you were brave enough to let them. The story that began with desperate loneliness ended with chosen family. And that, Daniel thought, as sleep finally claimed him, was exactly how it was meant to be.